The grass is heavy with silver dew, cool against the earth, beneath a sky that has not quite decided to be morning. The stars are fading, melting into a deep bruised violet, and the world is holding its breath. In the centre of a wide, quiet valley, a sudden, muffled roar breaks the stillness. A brilliant blossom of golden light erupts, casting long, dancing shadows across the field. It illuminates a vast, billowing expanse of fabric, unfolding like a sleeping giant taking its first, deep breath of the day. The fabric catches the firelight, glowing from within like a massive paper lantern resting on the earth, gently straining upward against the invisible weight of the dark. This is the waking of a hot air balloon, a vessel that belongs to the sky but patiently waits on the ground, gathering warmth until it is finally lighter than the air that surrounds it. You are here, standing in the cool mist, watching the colours stretch and rise. And as we embark on this gentle journey upward, leaving the heavy gravity of the day behind, there is nothing you need to hold on to. You do not need to try to remember the mechanics of the flight, the dates of history, or the names of the winds. Let your mind soften, just as the canvas of the balloon softens when the wind subsides. Let these ideas, these quiet truths of the sky, drift through your awareness. What stays with you, stays. What floats away, simply floats away into the dawn. You're permitted to just be here, feeling the ambient warmth of the burner, listening to the vast open silence of the ascent, and allowing the gentle currents of these words to carry you wherever you need to go. As the great lantern finally lifts, the earth falling away with a slow, imperceptible sigh, it carries with it an echo of a time when the sky was an untouched ocean. It is a beautiful thought that before any human ever looked down upon the curvature of the earth from the quiet safety of a woven basket, the very first travellers to leave the ground were much closer to the earth themselves. In the autumn of the 18th century, beneath the gilded gaze of Versailles, a magnificent envelope of blue and gold silk carried a sheep, a duck, and a rooster into the heavens. They were the pioneers of the air, chosen because they represented different domains of the natural world. The duck was accustomed to the skies, the rooster to the ground, and the sheep possessed a physiology thought to mirror our own. They ascended into the unknown and returned gently to the grass, unbothered, proving that the sky above was a place of safety, a gentle realm waiting to be explored by those willing to simply let go of the ground. To let go of the ground is to surrender the illusion of absolute control, to embrace the quiet art of yielding. When you observe a balloon drifting over a valley, it appears to be moving with absolute purpose, gliding effortlessly toward a distant horizon. Yet, there is no steering wheel in that woven basket, no rudder to carve a specific path through the sky. The pilot does not command the balloon to turn left or right. Instead, they practice a profound form of harmony with the invisible world. The atmosphere is not a single solid block of air, but a layered tapestry of currents, invisible rivers of wind flowing in different directions at different altitudes. To change course, the pilot simply adds a breath of heat to rise, or allows the air to cool slightly to descend, seeking out a new layer of wind, a new current to carry them. They find their way not by forcing a path, but by feeling for the flow that is already there, reminding us that sometimes the most graceful way to move forward is to elevate our perspective until we find a current that naturally carries us to where we need to be. When the current finally brings the traveller back down to the earth, the landing is rarely in a designated, predictable place. A flight ends where the wind decides it will end, often in a quiet pasture or a farmer's newly harvested field. This gentle unpredictability gave rise to one of the most elegant traditions of the sky. In the early days of flight, when massive breathing spheres descending from the clouds were a sight of profound mystery and sometimes alarm, pilots began to carry a bottle of champagne in the basket. Upon landing in an unexpected field, the balloonist would present the champagne to the landowner, a sparkling offering of peace and gratitude, a celebration of a safe return to the soil. It was a gesture that transformed an unexpected intrusion into a shared moment of wonder, a tradition that continues to this day. It is a beautiful reminder that our journeys, no matter how elevated or detached they seem, ultimately rely on the grace and welcome of others when we finally return to the ground. Yet, before that return, there are moments in the air that defy our understanding of altitude. We often imagine flight as a high, distant endeavour, miles above the clouds where the world below is reduced to an abstract, unreadable map. But the true magic of the hot air balloon is its unique ability to linger in the intimate spaces between the earth and the sky. Because it moves exactly at the speed of the wind, there is no wind resistance, no rushing air past the ears. A balloon can descend so carefully, so deliberately, that it merely skims the canopy of a forest. The pilot can hover inches above the leaves, close enough for a passenger to reach out and pluck a single, green leaf from the top of an ancient oak tree, hearing nothing but the rustle of the branches and the songs of the birds who are suddenly sharing their domain with a silent, colourful giant. It is a suspension of ordinary rules, floating safely in the quiet space where the sky touches the trees. This suspended stillness is why these magnificent craft are creatures of the twilight. You will rarely see a hot air balloon launching in the bright, turbulent heat of the midday sun. They are born in the hours of the dawn patrol or in the softening, fading light of dusk. During these transitions of the day, the Earth's atmosphere finds its deepest calm. The intense heating of the ground by the sun, which causes invisible thermal columns and unpredictable gusts, has either not yet begun or has finally faded away. The air settles into smooth, predictable layers. The balloonists seek out this atmospheric peace, aligning their journeys with the planet's own rhythm of resting and waking. To fly a balloon is to intimately know the quietest moments of the world, to ride the soft breath of the earth when it is most still, when the shadows are long and the light is golden and incredibly forgiving. Within that golden light, the mechanics of the flight are remarkably simple, an elegant dance of temperatures. Inside the massive expanse of the envelope, the air is not filled with exotic gases or complex machinery. It is simply the air of the morning, gently warmed. When the burner ignites, it raises the temperature inside the fabric to around 100 degrees Celsius, or just over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. This warmth causes the air molecules to spread out, to become less dense, less heavy than the cool, sleeping air outside the balloon. It is this simple contrast, this captured pocket of summer held within a delicate skin, that generates the lift. The balloon rises because it has cultivated a warmth within itself that makes it buoyant in a cooler world, a beautiful metaphor for how carrying our own internal warmth can lift us gently above the heavy, cold moments of our lives. Because this lift relies entirely on the contrast between inside and outside, one might naturally assume that balloons belong strictly to the warm days of summer. But the counterintuitive truth is that balloons are at their most powerful, their most effortlessly buoyant, in the bitter cold of winter. When the landscape below is blanketed in silent, heavy snow and the ambient air is crisp and freezing, the fire of the burner does not need to work as hard. The difference in temperature between the captive air inside and the frozen air outside is so vast that the balloon practically leaps into the sky, eager and light. A winter flight is a study in profound contrasts. The stinging, icy air against the face of the pilot, while the crown of the balloon above is a massive contained inferno, casting a warm, glowing shadow over the pristine white fields below. The skin that contains this inferno, this boundary between the warmth and the cold, is a marvel of delicate strength. Early pioneers trusted their lives to envelopes made of paper and varnished silk, materials that seem impossibly fragile for the task of lifting humans into the sky. Today, that material is typically a specialized lightweight ripstop nylon or polyester. If you were to touch it, it would feel incredibly thin, like the fabric of a light rain jacket or a fine tent. Yet, this gossamer material, woven in panels and reinforced by load tapes, is capable of holding several tons of weight. It is strong enough to withstand the tremendous upward force of the heated air, yet flexible enough to be folded away into a canvas bag at the end of the day. It teaches us that true strength does not always require rigid armour. Sometimes, the most resilient things are those that are light, flexible, and capable of holding warmth securely. While the balloon floats free, untethered and surrendered to the wind, it is never truly alone. The illusion of complete detachment is beautifully anchored by a devoted presence on the ground. For every balloon that drifts silently overhead, there is a chase crew navigating the earth below. This crew traces the shadow of the balloon, driving down winding country roads, pausing at quiet intersections, always watching the sky. They are connected to the pilot by radio, but more importantly by an unbroken tether of human attention. They anticipate the winds, predict the landing sites, and arrive to catch the basket, pack away the vast fabric, and bring the travellers home. It is a beautiful partnership between the wanderer and the watcher. Even as the balloonist experiences the profound solitude of the open sky, they are grounded by the comforting knowledge that someone below is looking up, following their path, and preparing for their safe return. As the flight draws to a close and the balloon begins its slow, gentle descent, we can clearly observe its shape against the horizon. Most balloons share the same recognizable silhouette, the classic, gentle teardrop. This shape was not chosen merely for its beauty, but because it is the absolute natural geometry of equilibrium. When warm air rises within a contained space, it pushes outward and upward with immense force, while the cooler air around it exerts a constant pressure inward. The teardrop is the perfect resting compromise between the lifting force of the heat and the weight of the fabric itself. It is the exact shape that stress takes when it finds total balance. Looking at it, suspended against the fading light, we see more than a vehicle. We see a perfect balance of forces, a quiet harmony of elements, reminding us that even the invisible air around us, when given a little warmth and direction, naturally forms itself into something breathtakingly graceful and enduring. That perfect, resting teardrop is not a single, unbroken sphere of fabric, but a masterful puzzle of geometry, meticulously stitched together. If you were to trace the smooth, rounded surface of the balloon with your eyes, starting from the open mouth hovering just above the burner and travelling all the way up to the very top, you would notice vertical seams gracefully curving upwards. These long continuous sections of fabric are known as gauze. Much like the segments of a gently peeled orange or the meridian lines delicately drawn on an antique spinning globe, these gauze give the massive envelope its recognisable structure, its reliable symmetry, and its incredible strength. A typical hot air balloon might be constructed of 24 or even 32 of these massive vertical slices. Each individual gore is precisely and mathematically cut so that when they are all sewn together side by side, they bow outward perfectly to capture and hold the heated air. It is a quiet, beautiful testament to the art of gathering many individual flat pieces, each one slightly tapered and uniquely shaped, to create a singular, expanding three-dimensional whole. The mind can rest easily in this comforting thought. That beautiful, seemingly effortless expansion, reaching high into the sky, is quietly supported by invisible lines of connection, sewn tightly together to safely hold the warmth. At the very apex where all those converging vertical lines finally meet, there is a secret mechanism hidden from the observers standing far below on the ground. You might naturally imagine the top of the balloon as a sealed, solid dome, designed to trap every ounce of heat, but it is actually designed to open and breathe. Nestled precisely at the crown, at the highest point of the envelope, is a large circular piece of fabric known as the parachute valve. It operates on a beautifully simple, elegant principle of physics and internal pressure. The hot air constantly pushing upward from the burner acts as a natural seal, holding this internal parachute tightly against the opening, keeping the gathered heat securely inside. But when the pilot wishes to descend, They gently pull a long, thin, brightly coloured cord that runs all the way down through the cavernous interior to the basket. This cord gently pulls the parachute valve downward, opening a temporary venting window at the top of the world. A gentle sigh of hot air is released into the cool surrounding sky, invisible but highly effective. The balloon softens, losing just a fraction of its buoyant lift, and begins to float slowly back toward the earth. As your own breath deepens and settles, you can imagine releasing a quiet internal valve in the mind, letting go of whatever daily tension has risen to the top of your thoughts, allowing yourself to slowly, softly descend into a much deeper, heavier comfort. The vessel that safely carries you through this gentle, drifting descent is a masterpiece of ancient technology that has remarkably never been bettered by modern engineering. In an age dominated by carbon fibre, titanium, and moulded high-impact plastics, the basket of a hot air balloon is still almost universally woven entirely by hand from natural wicker and rattan. This traditional choice is not born out of a simple sense of romantic nostalgia or a desire for a rustic vintage aesthetic. Wicker possesses a magical, inherent combination of physical properties that modern science still struggles to perfectly replicate in a laboratory setting. It is astonishingly lightweight, yet fiercely, stubbornly strong. More importantly, when the flight concludes and the balloon eventually touches back down upon the uneven earth, the woven cane acts as a brilliant natural shock absorber. It flexes, it bends, and it quietly creaks, absorbing the kinetic energy of the landing with a soft organic resilience before smoothly returning to its original rigid shape. It is a deeply comforting reminder that sometimes the most advanced, reliable way to navigate the unpredictable currents of the world is to rely on something flexible, something meticulously crafted by human hands, something that inherently knows how to bend gracefully without breaking when it finally meets the solid ground. While the woven basket rests firmly on the damp grass, the taming of the massive breathing envelope towering above requires a gentle, guiding hand from afar. During the delicate, vulnerable moments of inflation, or the final exhausting sighs of deflation, a single, incredibly long rope stretches from the very top of the balloon all the way down to the earth. This heavy, vital tether is known as the crown line. Before the air is ever heated, while the vast expanse of fabric still lies stretched out across the morning dew like a brightly coloured sleeping ocean, a dedicated crew member takes firm hold of the end of this line. They do not pull with sudden aggressive force. Instead, they offer a steady, grounding, reassuring weight. As the burner roars to life and the sleeping giant slowly stands up, catching the wind, the person on the crown line acts as a vital anchor in the shifting currents of air. They keep the balloon steady, preventing it from rolling dangerously or swaying too far off its centre of gravity. It is a solitary, quiet job, standing far away from the noise of the fire and the excitement of the basket, holding a single heavy thread that safely guides a towering giant. We all possess these invisible crown lines in our own lives, quiet, steadying forces, perhaps a memory or a loved one, that hold us perfectly stable while we gather our internal energy to rise, ensuring we find our true balance before we ever take flight. Once that perfect balance is found and the tether to the earth is finally released, the journey relies entirely on the unseen, layered architecture of the atmosphere. We often mistakenly think of the wind as a singular unified breath blowing uniformly across the landscape, but the open sky is actually a grand, invisible staircase of moving, sliding air. At different altitudes, the wind can flow at entirely different speeds and in entirely different directions, a meteorological phenomenon sometimes beautifully referred to as the box effect. A skilled pilot might lift off from a green valley and drift slowly toward the rising sun in the east, carried along by a low, gentle morning breeze. Then, by applying just a few brief seconds of intense heat, they rise 100 feet higher and gracefully catch an entirely different, unseen current, one that sweeps them gently back toward the west, or softly carries them to the north. They navigate this vast, trackless ocean not by steering forcefully against the world, but by quietly, patiently seeking out the natural flow that serves their intended journey. There is absolutely no need to fight the current. There is only the need to slightly elevate oneself, to change altitude with a breath of warmth, until you find the gentle stream that naturally carries you home. You too can allow your thoughts to drift right now, seeking a peaceful, effortless current, knowing deep down you do not have to force your way through the quiet hours of the night. This quiet, patient search for flowing currents is usually a creature of the early daylight, but there is a rare, spectacular exception that transforms the familiar balloon into a glowing terrestrial star. During special, celebratory gatherings in the cool, crisp evenings of autumn, dozens of massive balloons will fully inflate in a wide, darkened field without ever leaving the safety of the ground. This magical, stationary display is known as a balloon glow. As the twilight slowly deepens into a rich, velvet black, the pilots ignite their powerful burners in unison. Because the balloons remain heavily tethered to the earth, the intense roaring flames do not lift them into the dark sky, but instead illuminate the massive, colourful envelopes entirely from within. They instantly become colossal stained glass lanterns, glowing with brilliant saturated colours, deep reds, sunset oranges and sapphire blues against the backdrop of the night. The sound of the burners is a rhythmic, dragon-like breathing, casting warm, dancing, flickering light across the upturned faces of those who walk quietly among them. It is a moment of pure, shared wonder, a beautiful, grounding reminder that even when we are securely tethered to the ground, even during the times when we cannot take flight, we still possess the profound capacity to light up the dark, to radiate a beautiful, comforting warmth for everyone around us. The historical origins of that brilliant captured warmth can be traced back to a surprisingly ordinary domestic observation in a quiet French courtyard centuries ago. Long before the complex mathematics of aerodynamics and flight were fully understood, the very concept of the hot air balloon was born not in a sterile academic laboratory, but by the cosy warmth of a winter fireplace. The Montgolfier brothers, who were skilled paper manufacturers by trade, spent their quiet evenings watching embers and ash rise steadily up the chimney. They noticed the fascinating way a crumpled, discarded piece of burning paper would suddenly lift, seemingly defying gravity, carried upward by an invisible, unseen force. They did not initially understand the underlying physics of expanding heated gases. They simply believed that the fire itself created a special, magical type of gas, which they proudly named Montgolfier gas, that possessed the unique property of lightness. They began capturing this warm, rising air in small, experimental bags made of fine silk and their own manufactured paper, watching with quiet, breathless awe as these delicate creations floated gracefully to the ceiling of the room. It is a gentle, inspiring truth that some of the greatest, most profound shifts in human perspective begin not with complex, stressful calculations, but with a quiet, observant, relaxed mind simply watching the elegant, graceful movement of smoke rising in the evening air. When you finally step over the edge of the woven wicker basket and become a physical part of that rising, graceful movement, the most astonishing sensation of the flight is actually the profound, absolute lack of sensation. We inherently associate speed and travel with physical resistance, the rushing wind howling past the closed windows of a car, the shaking turbulence of a commercial airplane, or the loud friction of rubber tires on a paved road. But a hot air balloon moves entirely, seamlessly within the air mass itself. Once you're aloft and untethered, you're travelling at the exact speed and in the exact direction of the wind that holds you. Because you are perfectly, flawlessly synchronized with the atmosphere surrounding you, there is absolutely no breeze felt inside the basket. A delicate candle lit and placed on the edge of the wicker would not even flicker. Its small orange flame would stand perfectly straight and entirely still, even if the massive balloon is drifting rapidly across the landscape at 20 miles an hour. The Earth simply seems to unroll silently and continuously beneath you, a slow-moving, vibrant tapestry of dark green forests and patchwork fields. In this unique space of perfect, harmonious alignment with the world, the physical body naturally grows heavier, the busy mind can simply drift away, and the exhausting sensation of striving completely dissolves into a state of absolute motionless peace. To truly understand exactly where they are suspended within this vast ocean of motionless peace, the pilot relies on a few very quiet, highly sensitive instruments nestled safely inside a small padded leather case. While modern aviation technology offers bright digital screens and loud, complex warnings, the traditional tools of the dedicated balloonist are elegantly, beautifully simple. There is the altimeter, an intricate device which senses the delicate, invisible, shifting pressure of the atmosphere to accurately tell the pilot exactly how far they have drifted upward from the Earth. And beside it rests the variometer, an instrument of truly incredible microscopic sensitivity that constantly measures the subtle rate of climb or descent. It silently listens to the air, detecting minute changes in pressure so subtle that the human body cannot physically feel them, letting the pilot know if they are floating upward by a few gentle inches a second or slowly, imperceptibly sinking back toward the waiting trees. These traditional instruments do not demand immediate attention with loud, jarring alarms or bright flashing lights. They simply offer quiet, constant, reliable awareness. They are the calm, observant, unchanging watchers of the journey, carefully measuring the soft, rhythmic rise and fall of the flight, much like the rhythmic, steady, comforting rise and fall of your own breathing as you settle deeper and deeper into uninterrupted rest. As the flight drifts steadily onward, tracking quietly across the endless, sprawling canvas of the world, it casts a silent, faithful companion upon the ground far below. From the high, privileged vantage point of the basket, looking straight down, you can clearly see the balloon's own shadow, a perfect, dark, gliding circle slipping effortlessly over the complex contours of the Earth. It glides silently over the sharp tops of ancient dark pine trees, bends beautifully and fluidly as it crosses the undulating rolling slopes of a bright green hill, and briefly darkens the rushing, sparkling waters of a winding river for just a fleeting magical second. This dark, moving shadow is a silent, visual echo of the skyward journey, a constant physical connection between the floating traveller high in the sky and the solid, reassuring ground they temporarily left behind. Sometimes, as the journey nears its end, a pilot might unroll a long, heavy length of rope called a drop line, allowing it to trail softly through the high treetops to gently, naturally slow the balloon's forward momentum before the final landing. Whether it is the soft, brushing sound of a hemp rope grazing against the highest autumn leaves, or the quiet, completely silent passage of a massive shadow over a sunlit, empty field, the balloon touches the world below with a profound, quiet grace. It leaves no destructive trace, no heavy footprint, no lasting mark, only a momentary dimming of the bright light, a passing breath of wonder, before drifting silently onward toward the beautiful fading horizon, ready to discover what lies just beyond. Just beyond that beautiful fading horizon, where the physical world blurs into the velvet edge of the sky, the balloon continues its quiet dialogue with the sun. While we marvel at the brilliant, saturated colours of the nylon panels from the ground, the deep crimsons, the bright ceruleans, the golden yellows, the fabric itself must silently endure the intense, invisible energy of the high atmosphere. To protect this delicate, billowing canvas, the outside of the envelope is treated with a specialised microscopic layer of polyurethane or elastomeric silicone. This invisible painted shield feels slightly slick to the touch, like the smooth, resting surface of a still pond. The woven threads of the nylon beneath it, though incredibly lightweight, form a complex interlocking grid designed to stop tiny tears from growing, a resilient pattern known simply as ripstop. The primary purpose of this slick protective coating is to patiently reflect the harsh, ultraviolet rays of the sun, preventing the interlocking fibers from degrading and the vibrant colours from fading over years of flight. It is a comforting, profound realisation that the most massive, awe-inspiring structures often rely on an imperceptibly thin, invisible boundary to remain strong. We too carry our own quiet resilience, our own invisible layers of protection that allow us to step out into the bright, demanding light of the world without losing our essential, vibrant colours. Deep within the shadowed, cavernous interior of that protected dome, a much smaller, quieter mechanism acts as a faithful guardian of the craft's endurance. At the absolute apex of the balloon, near the circular parachute valve where the gathered warmth is at its most intense and heavily concentrated, sits a tiny, unassuming strip of adhesive called a templable. This little sentinel is marked with small, precise dots of a unique chemical compound. If the heated air gathered at the crown ever approaches the maximum safe temperature for the nylon fabric, usually hovering somewhere around 250 degrees Fahrenheit, these little indicator dots slowly, permanently melt and change colour, shifting from a soft, muted grey to a deep, permanent black. The pilot cannot actually see this label during the flight. It is a silent, faithful record checked only when the balloon is safely resting back on the cool, solid earth, deflated and quiet. It is a beautiful demonstration of quiet vigilance, a tiny, unobtrusive guardian resting at the highest possible point of the journey, ensuring the massive structure never pushes beyond its safe, capable limits. As you visualize this tiny protective seal resting at the top of the sky, your own shoulders can soften, the body growing a little heavier, trusting that there are gentle, unseen mechanisms in place to keep you completely safe as you rest. That captured intense heat at the top of the envelope contrasts breathtakingly with the freezing, unforgiving altitudes explored by the very earliest, most daring aeronauts. In the mid-19th century, curious scientists took to the skies not for simple leisure, but to meticulously map the completely unknown, invisible geography of the upper atmosphere. During one of these incredibly high, freezing ascents in a traditional gas balloon, two British explorers wrapped in heavy furs witnessed a phenomenon of pure enclosed magic. As they ascended into the sub-zero temperatures, thousands of feet above the earth, the moisture from their own breathing, mingling with the ambient moisture trapped inside the vast silken envelope, instantly crystallized. High above the clouds, completely isolated from the chaotic weather of the world below, it began to gently snow entirely inside the balloon. Tiny, perfect silver snowflakes drifted slowly down through the quiet, enclosed air of the gas cell, a completely private, localized winter storm contained within a fragile, floating bubble of silk. The freezing air outside was so utterly still, and the basket so perfectly quiet, that they could almost hear the microscopic, delicate sound of the ice crystals forming in the air above their heads. It reveals a magnificent poetic truth about the spaces we inhabit. Sometimes we carry our own profound internal weather with us, capable of creating moments of startling crystalline beauty even in the most isolated, distant environments. To remain in those distant, isolated environments for longer than a single morning requires an elegant, calculated marriage of elements. The traditional hot air balloon is entirely dependent on the continuous roar of the burner, inherently limiting its flight time to the amount of liquid propane it can safely carry in the woven basket. But for the most epic, unimaginable journeys, the solitary, grueling flights that cross vast, dark oceans and circumnavigate the entire globe, pilots rely on a majestic hybrid masterpiece known as a Rosier balloon. This ingenious vessel features a small, perfectly sealed inner sphere filled with lighter-than-air helium gas, surrounded completely by an outer heated chamber of regular air. Imagine looking down from that tiny woven sanctuary at the endless churning grey waves of the Atlantic, knowing your entire existence depends on this dual system. During the freezing, quiet hours of the long night, the pilot gently warms the outer layer of air, which in turn acts like a soft, invisible thermal blanket, preventing the precious inner core of helium from shrinking in the bitter cold. It is a perfect symbiotic relationship between two entirely different lifting principles, working in quiet harmony to sustain the flight for weeks at a time without ever touching the Earth. This intricate balancing act reminds us that true, enduring stamina often comes from blending different types of energy. The steady, permanent buoyancy of our core, wrapped in the adaptable, protective warmth we generate along the way. Whether drifting over an endless grey ocean or a familiar, softly rolling valley, a traveller suspended beneath the canopy eventually desires to look back at where they came from. Yet, a balloon moving perfectly with the current has no rudder to steer its path, and no steering wheel to physically turn its massive bulk. To gracefully change the view, the envelope is equipped with an elegant, almost invisible feature called turning vents. These are long vertical slits meticulously sewn into the wide equator of the balloon's fabric. By gently tugging on specific colour-coded lines running all the way down into the basket, the pilot can selectively open a slit on either the left or the right side. A small, carefully controlled breath of hot air is allowed to escape sideways, acting like a tiny, gentle thruster in the sky. The massive balloon, weighing several tons, responds to this tiny, invisible exhalation by initiating a slow, majestic pirouette. The entire world outside the basket begins to slowly revolve, a continuous panoramic unwinding of dark green forests, winding rivers, and distant hazy mountains, all without ever altering the balloon's steady forward trajectory. Your breathing can naturally align with this slow, panoramic turn, settling even deeper into your chest, knowing you do not ever need to change your final destination or force your path just to see things from an entirely new, beautiful perspective. The ability to change perspective without force is mirrored beautifully in the fundamental difference between how distinct types of balloons achieve their lightness. In the ancient, quiet realm of pure gas balloons, which rely solely on trapped hydrogen or helium, the pilot must physically discard weight to travel higher. They carry heavy, durable cloth bags filled with fine golden sand or clear water, known as ballast. To ascend into the higher, thinner clouds, they untie the bags and release a shower of sand. The sand, fine and dry, falls like golden rain through the high, thin air, scattering perfectly into the wind until it is nothing more than a distant memory of weight, allowing the lighter vessel to float upward. But the hot air balloon operates on a completely different, warmer philosophy. It does not require you to constantly shed the physical things you carry. Instead, to rise higher, the pilot simply adds more warmth to the envelope. They ignite a momentary flame, creating a brief, roaring glow that fills the cavernous space above them with new, vibrant energy. It is a profound, comforting contrast in the physics of elevation. You can rise by systematically dropping the heavy, exhausting burdens that weigh you down, or you can rise simply by cultivating a deeper internal warmth that makes you naturally lighter than the heavy world surrounding you. Both paths lead gracefully to the quiet sanctuary of the sky. It was from the quiet safety of that elevated sanctuary that humanity first managed to capture a permanent, physical memory of the Earth from above. Long before airplanes roared over the continents, and long before silent satellites quietly mapped the globe from the freezing vacuum of space, a daring Parisian photographer named Nadar stepped into the wicker basket of a heavily tethered balloon in the middle of the 19th century. He carried with him heavy, fragile glass plates and highly volatile chemicals, setting up a makeshift swaying darkroom directly inside the basket. As the balloon hovered 80 meters above the French countryside, swaying gently in the morning breeze, he carefully exposed a wet collodion plate, freezing the beautiful patchwork of small farms, curving roads, and the soft, slanted morning light onto the glass. The image had to be developed almost immediately, while still floating in the sky, smelling the sharp chemical tang of collodion mixing with the fresh, clean breeze of the altitude. It was the world's very first aerial photograph. Until that singular quiet moment, no human had ever been able to take a piece of the sky's high perspective and bring it back down to share with those who remained firmly planted on the ground. The simple desire to ascend, not just to travel, but to quietly observe and record the intricate, connected beauty of the landscape below, changed our relationship with the earth forever, turning the vast world into a piece of art that could be held quietly in the palm of a hand. This quiet, respectful observation goes both ways, as the natural inhabitants of the earth watch the balloon pass silently overhead. You might naturally imagine that a massive, brightly coloured sphere drifting low over a quiet forest canopy would cause a sudden panic among the creatures living in the shadows below. Yet, surprisingly, wild animals like resting deer, grazing horses and nesting birds rarely show any real fear of a hot air balloon. Because it glides exactly with the speed of the wind, the envelope creates absolutely no rustling breeze, no terrifying shadow of a swooping wing, and no harsh mechanical hum. To a deer standing quietly in a sun-dappled clearing, pausing to chew the sweet morning grass, the balloon does not register as a predator or an unnatural machine. It simply appears as a silent, brightly coloured cloud that has mysteriously decided to float a little closer to the earth. They may look up, their soft, alert ears twitching at the occasional distant hiss of the burner, but they quickly return to grazing, accepting the massive object as a natural, harmless part of the morning sky. There is a deep, abiding comfort in moving so softly and gracefully through the world. The mind can simply drift right along with it, mirroring that perfectly silent passage, slowly letting go of the exhausting need to be noticed or to make a loud impact, finding profound, restful peace in merely existing as a passing cloud. When many of these silent, colourful clouds gather together in one place, the sky becomes a breathtaking, woven canvas of shared, floating dreams. In the high, arid desert of New Mexico, nestled carefully in a wide, sweeping valley, there is a legendary gathering where the sheer scale of ballooning completely defies the imagination. During the Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta, the crisp, cool autumn mornings witness a magical phenomenon known as a mass ascension. Before the sun has even breached the rugged, rocky crest of the Sandia Mountains, over 500 towering hot air balloons inflate side by side on a massive field of frost-covered grass. As the dawn breaks, filling the wide valley with a soft, peach-coloured light, they begin to launch in carefully orchestrated, gentle waves. They rise perfectly together, filling the entire vast dome of the sky with hundreds of vibrant teardrop shapes, drifting like brilliantly coloured jewels suspended in an ocean of cool, endless blue. The magic of this specific location is the famous Albuquerque Box, a highly predictable tiered wind pattern that allows these hundreds of pilots to float peacefully away on a low southerly wind, rise up to catch a higher northerly wind, and drift back to land gracefully in the exact same field where they began. It is a stunning visual symphony of individual journeys moving together, sharing the exact same invisible currents in absolute unspoken harmony, returning safely to where they started. While that vast, colourful symphony relies on the brilliant illumination of the morning sun to showcase its beauty, there is an even more mysterious, incredibly rare type of journey that takes place entirely in the velvet, secret embrace of the dark. Most balloons are diurnal creatures of the dawn and dusk, safely folded and tucked away before the first stars appear. However, under exceptionally clear, calm conditions, highly experienced balloonists sometimes embark on the surreal, quiet adventure of night flying. They wait patiently for the specific phase of the month when the sky is graced by a brilliant full moon, casting a pale silver glow over the slumbering silent earth. Launching in the absolute stillness of midnight, the balloon ascends into a world completely devoid of bright colour, replaced entirely by a mesmerizing, quiet landscape of deep indigo shadows and shimmering silver highlights. The rivers below become twisting, slow-moving ribbons of liquid moonlight, and the sleeping towns appear as small, comforting clusters of warm, golden starlight. The burner above the basket illuminates the interior of the envelope with a warm, pulsing amber glow, briefly turning the entire craft into a solitary floating lighthouse, navigating an endless ocean of darkness. The silence up there is absolute, profound, and beautifully heavy, wrapped entirely in the cooling, quiet air. It is a deeply poetic reminder that even when the familiar bright warmth of the sun is completely gone and the world is draped in heavy, resting shadows, there is still a gentle guiding light available, allowing us to safely continue our journey, floating effortlessly, softly and securely, slipping gently into the deeper currents of the night. Slipping gently into the deeper currents of the night eventually gives way to the earliest, most delicate hints of morning. In the ballooning world, there is a dedicated group of aviators who exist entirely in this transitional threshold between dark and light, known intimately as the Dawn Patrol. Long before the main fleet of brightly coloured envelopes even begins to unfurl on the frosted grass, these solitary pioneers lift off while the stars are still sharp, silver and cold overhead. Their purpose is not merely to experience the profound, unbroken solitude of the dark, but to act as gentle, watchful scouts for the day to come. They fly to quietly test the invisible, shifting layers of the morning winds, carrying small, rhythmic strobe lights that flash against the darkness, mapping the unseen currents for everyone waiting below. It is a beautiful act of silent service, charting the safest path through the invisible ocean of the sky, before the sun has even thought about rising over the horizon. Knowing that someone has already ventured out ahead, feeling out the safe passages and gracefully testing the waters of the new day, allows the rest of us to rest a little easier, trusting that the path forward has already been softly, carefully illuminated. As that path slowly illuminates and the main fleet begins to stir on the ground, the base of every balloon reveals a subtle, highly specialized ring of protection. Where the great billowing canopy of colourful nylon reaches down to meet the roaring flame of the burner, the fabric abruptly changes its nature. This lower section, often black or a muted, unassuming shade, is known as the scoop or the skirt, and it is woven from a remarkable fire-resistant material called Nomex. This is the exact same incredibly resilient heat-deflecting fabric worn by professional racing drivers and exploring astronauts, designed to withstand intense direct heat without ever melting or catching fire. It acts as a necessary protective collar, safely funneling the massive column of superheated air up into the delicate nylon sphere while completely shielding the fragile edges from the occasional wandering tongue of flame. It is a quiet, masterful transition zone between the intense chaotic energy of the fire and the delicate, graceful lifting power of the envelope above. It beautifully reminds us that we all need a safe, protective boundary where our deepest, most intense energies can be carefully channeled, allowing us to harness our internal fire to lift ourselves up without burning the delicate structures that hold our lives together. The breath settles easily, recognizing the quiet strength of this safe, enduring containment. The containment of that immense, warmed air creates more than just upward lift. It crafts one of the most unique, unexpected acoustic environments in the entire world. If you were to stand directly beneath the massive, fully inflated dome while the burner is resting quietly, you would notice a profound alteration in the way sound behaves. The sheer, colossal volume of the hollow sphere, holding perhaps nearly 80,000 cubic feet of air, acts as a breathtaking, soft-walled cathedral of sound. Because the fabric is under immense outward tension, curved perfectly by the internal pressure, any small noise, a gently spoken word, a quiet laugh, or the sudden sharp call of a bird from the trees below, bounces off the inner walls and echoes with a rich, resonant clarity. Yet, Because the walls are made of soft, pliable nylon rather than hard, unforgiving stone, the echo is never harsh or jarring. It is softened, beautifully rounded, and gently returned to the ear as a warm acoustic embrace. It is a private, floating amphitheatre where the world's chaotic noise is softly filtered out, leaving only a pure, magnified stillness. The mind can simply drift into this quiet, floating resonance, appreciating how a vast, open space can perfectly soften even the sharpest, loudest edges of our daily noise. The magical, echoing space of the modern balloon owes its existence to a much smaller, quieter ancestor that first took flight across the world over 2 millennia ago. Long before the massive silk and paper marvels of 18th century France, brilliant minds in ancient China were already harnessing the elegant physics of captured heat. They meticulously crafted delicate small spheres from translucent oiled rice paper stretched tightly over thin, flexible frames of lightweight bamboo. At the bottom, they suspended a small, simple resin candle. As the candle burned, it filled the fragile paper shell with warm air, transforming it into a glowing, floating star that could rise high above ancient landscapes and sleeping, moonlit villages. Known historically as Kongming lanterns, they were initially used as silent, long-distance signals, glowing messages carried entirely by the night wind over vast distances. But over centuries they gracefully transcended their practical origins, becoming deeply embedded in festivals and quiet celebrations of the human spirit. Even today, watching a small paper lantern drift slowly into the black sky carries a profound, universal feeling of peaceful hope. It is a beautiful, enduring reminder that the desire to lift something luminous into the dark, to send a warm, quiet wish upward into the vastness of the universe, is one of the oldest and most beautiful of all human impulses. That ancient, quiet impulse to rise and observe finds perhaps its most surreal and breathtaking canvas in the ancient, wind-carved valleys of Cappadocia, Turkey. Here, the landscape itself seems entirely drawn from the surreal edges of a quiet, forgotten dream. Over millions of years, ancient volcanic ash has been slowly, patiently eroded by the wind and rain into towering, cone-shaped pillars of pale stone known as fairy chimneys, creating a vast, complex maze of honeycombed rock that stretches as far as the eye can see. Because the morning winds in this deep valley are incredibly stable, and the air is remarkably dry and calm, it has become one of the most famous, magical places on Earth for hot air ballooning. Every single morning, right as the dawn begins to paint the sky in shades of bruised violet and soft apricot, well over 100 balloons inflate and rise simultaneously from the valley floor. The pilots here are absolute masters of proximity, guiding their massive, gentle craft down directly into the deep, winding gorges, floating mere feet away from the ancient, cave-carved dwellings. The contrast is deeply, wonderfully hypnotic. The soft, vividly bright, silent spheres of modern fabric gliding effortlessly through a hard, ancient, monochromatic landscape of weathered stone. It completely shifts our sense of scale and time, showing us exactly how softly we can navigate even the most rugged, ancient terrains of our lives. The quiet, floating passage through such ancient, unyielding stone is made entirely possible by a seemingly ordinary, highly compressed liquid resting quietly in heavy steel tanks inside the woven basket. The fuel that feeds the roaring burner is liquid propane, held safely under immense silent pressure. The true magic of this modern fuel lies in its incredible, almost unbelievable rate of expansion when it's finally released into the open sky. When the pilot gently pulls the blast valve, opening the metal line, the propane is freed from its high-pressure captivity. As it escapes into the lower pressure of the ambient air, it instantly, violently boils, transforming from a dense, heavy liquid into a highly combustible, invisible gas. This transition is incredibly powerful. A single, tiny drop of liquid propane naturally expands to nearly 270 times its original volume in just a fraction of a second. This massive, sudden breath of gas is what hits the pilot light, creating the spectacular, towering column of flame that safely warms the entire balloon. It is a beautiful, hidden lesson in the nature of potential energy. Sometimes, an enormous, life-changing expansion requires only the smallest, gentlest release of pressure. Nothing needs to be aggressively forced. You only need to allow what is already safely compressed inside to find the right, open environment to naturally and safely expand. When the beautiful journey is finally over and the internal heat has fully dissipated into the cooling late afternoon sky, the massive, towering envelope must gracefully return to a state of absolute, compact rest. Deflating a hot air balloon is a highly tactile, deeply grounding process that completely reverses the morning's expansive upward growth. Once the heavy crown line pulls the absolute top of the balloon slowly back to the earth, stretching the vibrant nylon flat across the damp, sweet-smelling grass, the crew embarks on a quiet, rhythmic labour of pressing the remaining air out. Like folding an infinitely large, incredibly soft blanket, they start at the woven basket and walk slowly, steadily toward the top. Their heavy, purposeful steps gently press the remaining lingering pockets of summer warmth out through the open parachute valve at the crown. The fabric sighs, gently crinkles and yields to the weight, the immense three-dimensional structure completely collapsing back into a flat, manageable ribbon of colour. It is incredibly soothing to watch this massive structure, which just moments ago commanded the entire sky, willingly soften, completely surrendering its shape and its vast volume to be carefully folded away. Your own body naturally mirrors this quiet process, exhaling its own lingering tensions, growing heavier and heavier against the mattress, allowing all the remaining busy energy of the day to be slowly, methodically pressed out and completely released into the quiet room. Not all of these deflating, soft structures take the familiar, natural form of a simple, elegant teardrop. In the skies above great sprawling festivals, you might occasionally see massive floating sculptures, a gigantic smiling bumblebee, a towering, intricately detailed clock, or a colossal, beautifully rendered castle drifting silently through the high clouds. These are affectionately known as special-shaped balloons, and they present an incredible hidden challenge to the strict laws of aerodynamics. Because they completely abandon the natural equal pressure geometry of a perfectly round sphere, they require a complex hidden architecture hidden completely out of sight within the brightly coloured envelope. To maintain the sharp, defined angles of a castle turret, or the thin, jutting wings of a resting bee, the interior is filled with hundreds of internal structural fabric walls, technically known as baffles. These invisible, carefully engineered webs quietly guide the heated air into the farthest, most difficult to reach corners of the shape, ensuring the entire asymmetrical sculpture remains perfectly taut and recognisable as it slowly moves. It is a beautiful, comforting thought that even the most unusual, non-traditional shapes, the ones that beautifully refuse to conform to the standard expected mould, are carefully, quietly supported from the inside by a hidden, deeply reliable network of strength. They beautifully remind us that it is perfectly fine to take up a completely unique shape in the world, as long as we lovingly tend to the quiet internal structures that continuously hold us up. As those unique, beautifully complex shapes finally find their way back to the quiet earth, they rely completely on the devoted diligence of the recovery team, often affectionately called the chase crew. The delicate art of the chase is a terrestrial grounded mirror of the aerial journey, an intricate moving dance of prediction, careful navigation, and deep, unbroken attention. While the pilot surrenders entirely to the invisible whims of the upper winds, the crew below must constantly read the shifting landscape, anticipating the balloon's quiet path over winding sunlit rivers, dense green forests and quiet dead-end dirt roads. They must be intimately familiar with the local geography, possessing an almost intuitive, practiced sense of exactly where the wind will ultimately carry their floating charge. Their primary, unwavering goal is to be patiently waiting at the exact edge of a quiet pasture or a freshly harvested golden field the very moment the woven basket softly touches the soil. This silent, invisible tether of human connection ensures that no matter how far or how freely the solitary traveller drifts across the open sky, they are never truly lost or abandoned. It is a profound, deep comfort to the resting mind to know that there are always grounding forces in our lives, quietly tracking our progress, ready to gently catch us and help us carefully pack away our experiences when the long, beautiful flight is finally over. When that massive, colourful envelope is finally tucked tightly away into its heavy canvas bag and the woven basket is safely secured for the quiet ride home, there is a very specific, unforgettable fragrance that lingers softly in the cool air, a lasting sensory signature of the entire experience. It is a warm, deeply comforting scent, composed of a few very distinct, earthy elements perfectly woven together by the wind. There is the dry, organic, grounding smell of the crushed grass where the massive balloon was laid to rest. Mixed seamlessly into this is the subtle, slightly toasted aroma of the heated nylon fabric, a clean synthetic warmth that smells faintly like a fresh, sun-baked tent at the end of a long summer day. But the most prominent stabilizing note is the deep, woody scent of the woven wicker basket itself, slightly warmed by the burner, smelling beautifully like antique furniture and old, dry firewood. To a seasoned aeronaut, this completely unique olfactory blend is the absolute scent of pure freedom and safe return. It is an incredibly grounding, peaceful aroma, one that bypasses the busy, logical mind and speaks directly to the deep, slow-beating heart, quietly signalling that a great journey has been successfully completed. As this familiar, comforting scent seems to drift gently into the soft edges of your own imagination, the quiet sounds of the evening begin to blur, beautifully preparing you for the deeper, heavier stillness that always follows a long, quiet day, inviting you to close your eyes to the waking world and drift seamlessly into the vast, uncharted skies of your own deepest dreams. As you explore those vast, uncharted skies within, the mind, much like the great balloon, relies on a single, centering point of focus. At the absolute zenith of the massive nylon envelope, completely hidden from view beneath the brightly coloured, overlapping panels of fabric, lies a surprisingly small, incredibly heavy piece of hardware known as the crown ring. This ring, often forged by hand from thick, aircraft-grade aluminum or solid steel, is no larger than a standard dinner plate, yet it serves an unimaginably important purpose in the architecture of flight. Every single vertical load tape, the heavy, unyielding woven ribbons that run vertically up the sides of the envelope to give the balloon its strength and shape, travels all the way to the top to finally loop securely through this one central ring. It is the absolute anchor of the sky, a tiny, unyielding circle that gracefully gathers all the immense, outward stress of the heated air and perfectly distributes the heavy weight of the woven basket hanging far below. It is a comforting, grounding realization that you do not need to be massive to hold everything together. Even the grandest, most expansive ideas, or the heaviest, most complicated days, can be beautifully supported by one small, solid point of quiet stillness at the center of it all. That quiet, perfectly engineered stillness is a luxury of modern design, presenting a stark, beautiful contrast to the lively, flickering reality of the very first human voyages. When the daring Marquis d'Arlandes and Pilâtre de Rosiers untethered their magnificent, intricately painted blue and gold envelope over the slate-grey rooftops of Paris in the autumn of 1783, they were flying a primitive machine born of pure, roaring fire. Their early burner was nothing more than a heavy iron grate suspended directly in the open neck of the balloon, fueled constantly by damp straw, old wool and dry wood. They believed it was the thick, dark smoke itself that held the magical lifting power. As they drifted slowly over the glittering, winding River Seine, the roaring fire occasionally threw stray, glowing orange embers against the inside of the delicate paper and silk fabric. To survive this delicate, airborne dance with the flame, the two aeronauts carried heavy wooden pails of water and a large, soft sponge tied securely to the end of a long stick, diligently and calmly dabbing out small, smouldering holes as they glided over the astonished, upturned faces of the city. The body softens, the breath deepening even further as you realise how far we have safely come, from a frantic, airborne dance with water and flame to the effortless, controlled, and perfectly quiet blue burners of today, where the fire is fully tamed and the mind can simply rest. Today, the desire to intimately interact with the quiet sky has become so refined that some travellers choose to dispense with the traditional heavy woven basket entirely. In a highly specialised, intensely personal form of flight known affectionately as cloud hopping, the pilot wears the balloon almost like a carefully tailored garment. Instead of standing behind a protective high wall of creaking wicker, the solitary aeronaut sits comfortably in a simple, heavy-duty paragliding harness, their legs dangling completely free in the open, rushing air, suspended directly beneath a much smaller, incredibly agile single-person envelope. The single, quiet burner is mounted securely on a frame just behind their head. When they lift off the morning grass, there is absolutely nothing between them and the earth below, nothing separating them from the soft, invisible currents of the atmosphere. They can skim incredibly low over wide, dew-covered fields, dragging their leather boots softly through the heavy heads of tall golden wheat, or lift their knees simply to clear a weathered wooden fence. It is the closest humanity has ever come to the pure, unmediated sensation of simply floating, a brilliant shedding of all heavy protective walls in favour of absolute weightless immersion in the open air. This weightless, unshielded immersion allows the deeply observant pilot to physically feel the absolute subtlest, most delicate movements of the world's morning breath. In deep, winding river valleys, during the early, cool, shadow-filled hours before the sun fully crests the ridges, a beautiful, invisible phenomenon known as a drainage wind softly occurs. As the heavy, cold night air from the high mountain peaks rapidly cools, it physically sinks, pouring slowly down the steep forested slopes and pooling into the lowest points of the valley floor like a slow, invisible, silent river of water. A skilled pilot can launch in the soft pre-dawn light and intentionally drop their balloons straight down into this shallow, gently flowing layer of icy air. By catching this highly localized, downward-flowing breeze, known scientifically as a katabatic wind, they can navigate with astonishing pinpoint precision. They simply surrender to the cold current, following the exact meandering curves of a rocky riverbed for miles without ever touching a steering control. It is a stunning, calming example of how, when we stop resisting and simply allow ourselves to settle deeply into the low, quiet, cooling places, we often find a perfectly natural current that guides us effortlessly forward. As you settle deeper into your own quiet space, resting entirely in the invisible, flowing current of the night, your mind is held perfectly safe by the resilient woven architecture of the journey. To ensure that the massive fabric canopy can endure the shifting, unpredictable winds without ever faltering, every single panel of the envelope is joined together by a masterful, deeply reliable technique known as the double lap seam. The delicate edges of the ripstop nylon are not simply sewn together in a single vulnerable line. They're carefully folded over each other, interlocking deeply like firmly clasped hands, and then stitched through multiple times with heavy, bonded, incredibly strong thread. This meticulous folding creates a slightly raised, heavily reinforced ridge running the entire vertical length of the gore. The true brilliance of this specific design is its incredible capacity for quiet containment. Should a wayward, sharp tree branch ever catch the taut fabric during a low, skimming flight, creating a small tear, the damage will absolutely not run or spread across the sky. The tear will stop the very instant it reaches that thick, interlocking protective seam. It is a deeply reassuring, quiet metaphor for our own emotional resilience. We may experience small, unexpected snags, but we are woven together with strong, interlocking boundaries that prevent those minor tears from unravelling our entire beautiful shape. While the vibrant hot air balloon is a creature of the morning, strictly bound by the finite limits of its burning fuel, there is an older, much quieter sibling that measures its journey not in fleeting golden hours, but in drifting endless days. The pure gas balloon, filled entirely with lighter-than-air helium or completely sealed hydrogen, requires no roaring fire or constant attention to maintain its graceful, steady lift. Because the lifting gas is perfectly, permanently captured within the airtight envelope, it can launch into the sky and simply stay there, floating silently over vast continents and dark, rolling oceans in absolute, uninterrupted peace. In the legendary, century-old Gordon Bennett Cup, dedicated pilots launch these silent, spherical vessels with the simple, beautiful goal of seeing who can drift the furthest physical distance without ever touching the Earth. They live harmoniously inside small enclosed capsules for 3 or 4 continuous days and nights, sleeping softly while suspended in the freezing stratosphere, eating warm soup from thermoses while watching multiple, breathtaking sunrises paint the curvature of the Earth. Their entire existence becomes a long, slow surrender to the high atmospheric winds, proving that incredible, vast distances can be crossed simply by remaining remarkably still, holding on to your internal buoyancy and letting the vast world turn quietly beneath you. Sometimes the invisible wind interacts with the resting balloon in ways that playfully, momentarily deceive the human senses, creating a fascinating aerodynamic phenomenon known beautifully as false lift. When a balloon is securely tethered to the ground by heavy ropes during a breezy afternoon, and a strong, steady wind rushes horizontally across the curved, smooth top of the partially inflated fabric, the air moving over the upper curve is forced to travel much faster than the air below. This specific movement creates a sudden, invisible zone of extremely low pressure directly above the balloon, exactly replicating the aerodynamic force that lifts the rigid, metal wings of a commercial airplane. The massive envelope will suddenly surge violently upward, straining against its heavy, groaning tethers, feeling incredibly, unexpectedly light and desperate to fly. To the inexperienced pilot standing in the basket, it feels as though the balloon is possessed by a sudden intense buoyancy. Yet, the very moment the heavy ropes are finally released and the balloon begins to travel at the exact same speed as the surrounding wind, this rushing airflow instantly stops. The aerodynamic magic completely disappears, and the true, heavy, natural weight of the craft immediately returns. It quietly reminds us that sometimes the fast-moving pressures rushing past us can make us feel artificially lifted or temporarily ungrounded, but the moment we move in harmony with the current, we find our true, heavy, natural center again. The physical body can simply relax right now into its own natural resting weight against the bed. Finding that true, heavy center becomes profoundly important when the beautiful visual world outside the basket completely disappears. While careful balloonists generally avoid flying directly into the thick, turbulent, heavy weather of a rainstorm, they will occasionally drift perfectly and silently into the heart of a high, solitary, peaceful white cloud. The absolute moment the wicker basket slips past the wispy, grey, vaporous boundary of the mist, the entire universe completely vanishes. There is no green earth visible below, no blue sky above, and no sharp horizon line to orient the resting eye. The pilot and passengers are instantly suspended in a perfectly spherical, infinite white room. The sunlight inside the dense cloud is completely and uniformly diffused, creating a soft, shadowless, pearl-like glow that seems to miraculously emanate from everywhere at once. The air feels suddenly cooler against the face, damp and incredibly fresh, smelling faintly of distant rain and clean, crisp ozone. In this silent, glowing white void, all sense of speed, altitude, and direction is completely erased. It is a profound, beautiful moment of sensory isolation, a temporary, comforting erasure of the busy outside world that forces the mind to quietly look inward, finding absolute peace in the soft, empty, glowing white space of the present moment. Before you can drift effortlessly into that cool white mist, the fiery, beating heartbeat of the balloon must prepare the surrounding air with meticulous, calculated precision. If you look closely at the complex, gleaming metal architecture of the double burner suspended safely above the pilot's head, you will notice that the heavy fuel lines do not run directly into the open flame. Instead, they are carefully routed through a thick, spiraling metal coil made of polished stainless steel. As the pilot periodically blasts the fire to maintain altitude, this heavy metal coil sits directly in the flame, becoming intensely, searingly hot. When the pressurized liquid propane later travels through this superheated, glowing spiral on its way to the nozzle, it instantly boils and vaporizes into a completely dry gas before it ever reaches the open air. This brilliant, invisible preheating process ensures that when the fuel finally ignites, it burns with incredibly high efficiency, creating a clean, bright, powerful blue flame rather than a smoky, chaotic, inefficient yellow one. It is a masterful, quiet process of internal preparation. The intense heat of previous efforts is captured and intelligently used to warm the fuel for the next, ensuring that every subsequent burst of energy is cleaner, quieter, and far more refined than the last. The higher that refined, invisible energy carries a vessel, the more the fundamental rules of the physical world begin to dramatically, beautifully change. When highly specialized, unmanned research balloons are launched into the extreme, freezing upper edges of the stratosphere, the very dark, quiet threshold of space, they do not look anything like the plump, perfectly round teardrops we see floating over weekend summer festivals. On the concrete launch pad, they appear remarkably empty and fragile, looking like incredibly long, thin, underfilled ribbons of clear plastic stretching hundreds of feet into the morning air, holding only a tiny, highly concentrated bubble of helium at the absolute top. But as they ascend slowly into the thinning atmosphere, where the crushing heavy weight of the Earth's air pressure rapidly drops away, that small, tight bubble of gas begins to naturally, effortlessly expand. By the time the balloon reaches 20 miles above the Earth, suspended in a silent sky that has turned from pale blue to absolute starry black, that long, skinny ribbon has blossomed into a perfect, massive, impossibly taut sphere, sometimes the size of an entire football stadium. It is a stunning, beautiful visual truth about the nature of growth and expansion. When we finally rise above the heavy, crushing pressures of our immediate daily atmosphere, the small, quiet things we carry deeply inside us are finally given the vast, empty space they need to reach their absolute, most magnificent size. And as the dark, starry edges of sleep begin to expand softly around you, filling the room with a quiet, boundless peace, the mind too can finally unfurl, reaching its most comfortable, weightless form in the cool, deep expanse of the night. In the cool, deep expanse of the night, where the boundaries between the physical world and the dreamscape begin to blur, the very first maps of the heavens were being drawn not by telescopes, but by the quiet ascending path of the balloon. It is a beautiful irony that to understand the vastness of the planet, we had to first learn how to leave it. In the early 19th century, an era of intense, quiet curiosity, scientists realized that the air itself was a library of secrets waiting to be read. They equipped their wicker baskets with delicate mercury barometers, glass vials for capturing pure mountain air, and sensitive thermometers encased in polished wood. As they drifted upward, away from the bustling, coal-stained streets of industrial cities, they discovered that the atmosphere was not a chaotic void, but a perfectly ordered series of layers, each with its own temperature, its own weight, and its own unique stillness. They were the first to realize that the higher we go, the more the world clarifies, transforming from a noisy, tactile experience into a pure mathematical grace. This realization invites the mind to settle into its own internal layering, where the heavy, noisy thoughts of the day naturally sink to the bottom, leaving the higher reaches of your awareness clear, calm, and perfectly still. This stillness allows for a unique type of communication that exists only in the high, silent corridors of the sky. While we are accustomed to the way sound is swallowed by the trees or scattered by the wind on the ground, the acoustic environment of a ballooning flight is one of startling, crystalline intimacy. When the burner is silent and the balloon is gliding perfectly with the breeze, the pilot can often hear conversations from people walking in the fields hundreds of feet below. A dog's distant bark, the sharp click of a gate, or the soft laughter of children echoes upward, carried on the rising heat of the morning, sounding so close it feels as though they are standing right beside the basket. This happens because the ground acts as a massive acoustic reflector, and the balloon, moving at the exact speed of the air, creates no wind noise to mask these terrestrial whispers. It is a profound, quiet connection to the world, a way of being in the world while remaining gracefully apart from it. You can allow your own breath to become just as quiet and receptive now, sensing how much peace is found when we simply listen to the soft, rhythmic sounds of our own existence without feeling the need to respond. The silence of the journey is periodically punctuated by the magnificent roar of the burner, which is itself a masterpiece of quiet, reliable engineering. If you were to look closely at the pilot's hands as they operate the controls, you would see a small secondary lever located just beneath the main blast valve. This is the whisper burner, or the liquid fire valve. While the main burner is designed for powerful rapid lifts, the whisper burner allows the pilot to add heat with a much softer, more diffuse flame. It draws liquid propane directly into the air without the loud, percussive roar of the gaseous blast, producing a gentle, hissing sound like a soft summer wind through tall grass. This is used specifically when drifting low over livestock or quiet residential areas, out of a profound, ingrained respect for the peace of the world below. It is a gentle, technical reminder that even when we need to generate energy to stay aloft, we can do so with a quiet, considerate grace that honors the stillness of those around us. As the mind continues to drift, you can imagine your own internal energy shifting to this whisper mode, a soft, steady, unobtrusive warmth that keeps you buoyant without any effort or noise. As the body grows heavier and the breath settles into a deep, effortless rhythm, we can reflect on the incredible, unexpected durability of the materials that make this flight possible. While the colourful nylon of the envelope appears delicate, almost like the skin of a ripening fruit, it is part of a construction process that involves miles of incredibly strong industrial-grade thread. In a standard hot air balloon, there are often over 3 miles of specialised UV-resistant polyester thread holding the panels together. Every single inch of every seam is meticulously inspected, ensuring that the thousands of individual stitches work together as a single, unified web of strength. This vast network of threads is designed to withstand not just the heat, but the immense, shearing forces of the wind and the weight of the passengers. It is a comforting thought that a vessel of such immense scale and beauty is held together by millions of tiny individual points of connection, each one performing its small part with absolute quiet reliability. It reveals that our own sense of security is often woven from thousands of small daily habits and quiet, reliable truths that, when taken together, create a structure strong enough to carry us through any sky. This structure allows the balloon to perform a beautiful natural function that once saved the lives of explorers in the most desolate places on Earth. In the late 19th century, as humans struggled to reach the North Pole, balloons were seen as the ultimate silent scouts of the frozen North. The Swedish explorer Say Andre famously attempted to reach the pole in a heavily reinforced gas balloon named the Eagle. While the journey was fraught with the challenges of the era, the balloon itself proved to be a remarkable thermal sanctuary. In the blinding, whiteout conditions of the Arctic, the internal gas of the balloon would absorb the faint, filtered radiation of the sun, keeping the air inside significantly warmer than the brutal, freezing environment outside. Even in the most extreme monochromatic desolation, the balloon created its own small, private climate of survivable warmth. It serves as a beautiful metaphor for the mind's ability to create a sanctuary, a warm, internal space that remains calm and protected, regardless of how cold or stark the external landscape may seem. You can feel that warmth now, a soft, localized comfort that begins in the center of your chest and radiates outward, keeping you safe and cozy within the sanctuary of your rest. The sense of sanctuary is deepened by the unusual ancient colors that have traditionally defined the history of flight. Before the invention of synthetic dyes and bright neon nylons, early balloons were often treated with a mixture of linseed oil, beeswax, and natural resins to make the fabric airtight. This gave the envelopes a warm, translucent amber glow, making them look like massive floating pieces of sun-drenched parchment. When the sun hit these oil-treated balloons from behind, they would illuminate with a deep, honey-coloured light, casting a golden shadow over the landscape. This historic aesthetic is still honoured today in the vintage class of balloons, which use specialised fabrics to replicate that soft, organic translucence. Floating in such a vessel feels less like being in a machine and more like being inside a living, breathing lantern. This warm, golden light is a natural sedative for the brain, signalling that the day is done and the time for high-energy observation has passed. You can visualise this amber light now, a soft, honeyed glow that fills your vision, warming the eyelids and inviting the thoughts to simply dissolve into the golden warmth of a quiet, fading afternoon. Beyond the golden glow of the afternoon, the physics of the balloon reveals a startling fact about the very air we breathe. We often think of air as nothing, a weightless void that offers no resistance, but to a balloonist, air is a heavy, tactile fluid, much like water. A standard hot air balloon contains about 3 tons of air. When you're standing on the ground, looking up at the fully inflated envelope, you're looking at several thousand pounds of atmosphere that has been captured, warmed, and convinced to rise. This mass is what gives the balloon its momentum, the reason it doesn't just stop instantly when the burner is turned off, and the reason it descends with a slow, majestic deliberation. It is a profound shift in perspective. We are not floating in nothingness. We are supported by a massive, invisible ocean that has its own weight, its own strength, and its own capacity to hold us up. This realization allows the body to fully surrender its weight to the bed, trusting that you are supported by forces much larger and more reliable than you can see. You're not holding yourself up. The world is holding you, cradling you in a dense, invisible embrace of perfect safety. This embrace is guided by the most ancient of tools, even in our age of satellite navigation. While a pilot may have GPS and digital maps, many still carry a simple, low-tech instrument known as a pieball or pilot balloon. Before every launch, a small helium-filled latex balloon, usually bright red or yellow, is released into the air. The crew stands in absolute silence, heads tilted back, watching this tiny dot of colour as it rises. They aren't just watching where it goes, they are watching how it dances. If the pieball rises straight and true, the air is stable. If it suddenly zigs to the left or begins to spin, it reveals a hidden shear, a layer of wind moving in a different direction. This tiny, humble scout tells the pilot the story of the sky's secret currents before they ever leave the ground. It is a lesson in the power of small, quiet observations. Sometimes, we don't need complex systems to understand where we're going. We simply need to release a small, quiet thought and watch where it drifts, trusting that the simplest signs will show us the way to the most peaceful path. The path of the balloon is also a journey through the history of human architecture. In the late 1700s, as balloons became a global sensation, they actually influenced the way buildings were designed. Architects began to incorporate aeronautical salons and high, domed ceilings into great houses, inspired by the soaring vertical volume of the balloon's interior. There was a brief, beautiful period where the world became obsessed with verticality, the idea that beauty should be measured by how well it leads the eye toward the sky. Furniture was decorated with balloon motifs, and gardens were designed to be viewed from above, with intricate hedge mazes and parterres that only revealed their true patterns to the drifting aeronaut. It reminds us that our perspective changes the very way we build our lives. When we look at our world from a higher, more relaxed vantage point, the patterns of our daily lives, which might seem confusing or maze-like when we're on the ground, suddenly reveal their true, beautiful logic. Nothing needs to be changed. It only needs to be seen from the right height to be understood as part of a larger, harmonious design. The mind can simply drift now, letting the patterns of the day soften and fade as the balloon reaches its final, most peaceful equilibrium. This state is known to pilots as trim. It is that magical moment where the heat inside the balloon perfectly balances the weight of the basket and the coolness of the outside air. In trim, the balloon neither rises nor falls, it simply is. It hangs suspended in the sky like a fruit on an invisible vine, perfectly weightless, perfectly still. The pilot can set down the burner controls, step back from the edge of the basket, and simply exist in the center of the sky. There is no destination, no speed, and no effort. This is the ultimate goal of every flight. To find that point of perfect, effortless balance where the world and the traveller are in total agreement. You're reaching that state of trim now. Your breathing is the burner, soft and rhythmic. Your body is the basket, heavy and secure. Your mind is the envelope, vast and light. Everything is in balance. Everything is exactly as it should be. The air around you is cooling now, and as it does, the balloon begins a slow, almost imperceptible descent back toward the velvet shadows of the evening. The landscape below is beginning to tuck itself in. You can see the long blue shadows of the trees stretching across the golden fields, like the fingers of the earth reaching out to welcome the sky. In this cooling air, the balloon becomes even more responsive, even more sensitive to your gentle touch. We're moving toward the final chapters of our journey, where the ground and the sky will finally meet in a soft, whispering embrace. The world is becoming a place of soft textures and muted sounds, where the only thing that matters is the steady, comforting rhythm of the drift. You're safe, you're supported, you're exactly where you need to be, floating gently toward the softest part of the night, where the air is still and the dreams are waiting to unfold like silk in the wind. As we continue this descent, we will find ourselves exploring the secret ways that water and air interact to create the most beautiful, fleeting moments of the flight, the splash and dash across a mirror-still lake, and the way the morning mist clings to the wicker like a damp, cool memory of the clouds. That damp, cool memory of the clouds is fully realized when a highly skilled pilot orchestrates one of the most breathtaking maneuvers in all of aviation, affectionately known as a splash and dash. As the balloon drifts slowly over a wide, mirror-still lake in the breathless quiet of the early morning, the pilot allows the massive vessel to descend with absolute microscopic precision. They do not wish to land, but merely to gently kiss the surface of the Earth's deepest, quietest waters. The sprawling envelope hovers just feet above the glassy lake, and the heavy woven bottom of the wicker basket smoothly breaches the surface tension. For a few magical suspended seconds, the aeronauts are travelling perfectly by water and by air simultaneously. The cold, dark lake water rushes softly through the gaps in the woven rattan floor, soaking the heavy leather runners and acting as a sudden gentle brake, slowing the forward momentum of the flight to a peaceful gliding crawl. Looking over the edge, the passengers can see the massive, colourful reflection of their own balloon staring perfectly back at them, a complete, unbroken sphere of colour resting on the water. It is a profound sensory bridge between the heavy liquid world and the weightless sky, reminding us that we can gracefully touch the deepest, coolest depths of our emotions without ever sinking into them, quickly rising again with a simple, warm breath of air. Rising back into the warming sky, the damp wicker gently weeping small, sparkling drops of lake water back to the earth. The balloon might eventually climb above a low, rolling layer of morning fog. When the vast, colourful envelope breaches this soft white ceiling and emerges into the brilliant, unobstructed sunlight of the higher altitudes, it creates a deeply personal, breathtaking optical illusion upon the clouds below. With the bright sun shining directly behind the balloon, it casts a crisp, dark, perfectly round shadow onto the sprawling blanket of the white mist beneath it. But because the mist is composed of millions of microscopic water droplets, the sunlight diffracts around the edges of the balloon, creating a brilliant full-circle rainbow that completely surrounds the dark shadow. This incredibly rare 360-degree halo of pure glowing colour is known in atmospheric physics as a glory. It is a solitary, quiet masterpiece of light that can only be witnessed from a high, floating vantage point, looking down upon the clouds. The glory moves silently with you, a constant, radiant companion gliding over the fog, offering a beautiful, quiet reflection that no matter where we drift in the vastness of the world, we're always carrying our own unique light, continuously encircled by a quiet, beautiful radiance that follows our every move. That radiant, high-altitude stillness is occasionally shared by the true ancient masters of the sky, who view the towering balloon not as an intruder, but as a massive, colourful companion. When soaring high above the patchwork fields, it is incredibly common for balloonists to be quietly joined by large birds of prey, such as red-tailed hawks or majestic golden eagles. These magnificent birds spend their mornings actively searching for thermals, invisible, rising columns of warm air that allow them to circle higher and higher without ever needing to flap their heavy wings. Because a hot air balloon naturally seeks out and rides these exact same upward currents, the birds will simply glide right up to the envelope, circling tightly alongside the wicker basket in a slow, elegant, silent waltz. They show absolutely no fear of the gentle giant, instinctively understanding that this massive drifting shape is simply surrendering to the exact same invisible forces of nature that they are. As you visualize this slow, turning dance in the high air, your own breathing can naturally match its steady, sweeping rhythm, the body growing heavier, the mind simply drifting alongside them, realizing that there is profound peace in sharing our space quietly with others who are riding the exact same unseen currents. While those soaring hawks rely entirely on the sun to heat the earth and create those rising thermals, there is a very rare, entirely silent class of balloon that harnesses the sun's ambient heat in an even more direct, fascinating way. Known as solar balloons, these remarkable envelopes completely dispense with the heavy metal tanks and the roaring, fiery breath of the liquid propane burner. Instead, they are constructed from incredibly thin, lightweight, pitch-black material, often a highly specialized polyethylene film. As the morning sun rises and its rays strike the dark, expansive surface of the balloon, the black material rapidly absorbs the solar radiation, naturally heating the captured air inside the envelope. Slowly, gently, and in absolute unbroken silence, the massive black sphere becomes naturally buoyant and lifts away from the earth, carried upwards solely by the quiet, radiant warmth of the nearest star. Flying in a solar balloon is a lesson in ultimate patience and profound surrender, as you cannot artificially command a sudden rise with a loud blast of fire. You must simply wait for the sun to provide. It is a beautiful, comforting thought that sometimes we do not need to forcefully generate our own exhausting energy to rise above our circumstances. We simply need to position ourselves quietly in the light, absorbing the warmth around us until we naturally become light enough to float. Conversely, the traditional hot air balloon, which relies so heavily on generating its own internal fire, creates a hidden, microscopic weather system entirely within its own colourful walls. When the powerful burner ignites, sending a towering flame into the cavernous space above, it is not merely producing dry heat. The chemical combustion of liquid propane naturally produces a massive amount of water vapour as a byproduct. Over the course of a single hour-long flight, the roaring burner can quietly release several gallons of invisible water into the hot air filling the envelope. As this warm, deeply humid air eventually rises and makes contact with the much cooler nylon fabric at the very top of the balloon, the moisture instantly condenses. It forms thousands of tiny glittering droplets of dew on the interior ceiling. Sometimes, when the burner is paused and the internal air cools slightly, these gathered droplets will detach, creating a very brief, incredibly soft, microscopic rain shower that falls entirely inside the balloon, lightly misting the pilot and passengers far below. It is a stunning, intimate secret of the sky, revealing that the very energy we use to lift ourselves up also creates a soft, nurturing atmosphere within our own enclosed spaces, gently watering the seeds of our own quiet journeys. When that soft internal mist gently settles upon the edges of the woven basket, it touches a material perfectly chosen to offer a profound sense of tactile comfort and grounding safety. The absolute top rim of the wicker carriage, the exact place where excited passengers naturally lean their arms and rest their hands to gaze out at the sprawling world, is known as the bolster. This thick protective edge is heavily padded with high-density foam and meticulously wrapped in incredibly soft, supple suede or thick, luxurious leather. This smooth, continuous ribbon of soft leather provides a beautiful, deeply comforting contrast to the rigid, creaking, unyielding texture of the woven rattan walls below it. It is entirely designed to protect the fragile human body from the rough edges of the journey, ensuring that every touch point between the traveller and the flying machine is forgiving, warm, and exceptionally soft. Down below, at the very base of the basket, thick, heavy hides of raw leather are tightly bound around the wooden runners, acting as a final, durable shield against the rough, abrasive earth during a landing. The mind can find great peace in this careful, intentional design, knowing that even in the most grand, adventurous experiences, we can thoughtfully pad our edges, deliberately cushioning ourselves against the rougher textures of the world so we can fully, comfortably enjoy the view. That careful padding and protection extends the physical life of the aircraft, but the massive nylon envelope above is destined to slowly, gracefully age under the constant exposure to the open sky. Over hundreds of hours of flying, constantly expanding with intense heat and contracting in the cool evening air, continuously bathed in the harsh ultraviolet light of the sun, the microscopic fibres of the fabric begin to slowly stretch and fundamentally change. The balloon develops a beautiful natural characteristic that pilots refer to as porosity. While a brand new envelope is stiff, crisp, and completely airtight, holding the heated air like a perfectly sealed drum, an older, deeply experienced balloon becomes slightly porous, allowing tiny, invisible amounts of air to gently breathe through the fabric itself. During annual safety inspections, mechanics use a specialized quiet machine, resembling a small vacuum to test exactly how much air the old canvas lets through. There is a deep poetic elegance to this slow aging process. The balloon does not suddenly fail, it simply becomes more permeable, gradually exchanging more of its internal warmth with the vast, cool world outside. You do not need to hold anything too tightly right now. Just like the well-travelled canvas, you can gently allow the heavy accumulated elements of the long day to simply pass through you, leaving you resting softly, breathing easily in the quiet night. As the fabric naturally softens and breathes over the passing years, the true, enduring strength of the balloon is revealed to be hidden entirely in its invisible, geometric skeleton. If you look at the beautiful curved shape of the envelope, the absolute widest horizontal point is known as the equator. This sprawling, swelling midline is where the outward pressure of the heated air is at its absolute maximum, pushing violently against the boundaries of the craft. To safely manage this immense invisible stress, the balloon relies on a masterful grid of load tapes, heavy, unyielding ribbons of woven nylon that crisscross the entire structure horizontally and vertically. The colourful, billowing fabric panels do not actually bear the heavy structural weight of the basket or the immense force of the climb. They merely act as a thin, beautiful skin that traps the air, while the interlocking, rigid skeleton of the load tapes quietly absorbs all the tension, safely distributing the weight from the crown ring at the top all the way down to the steel carabiners at the bottom. It is a deeply grounding, calming realization that the most vibrant, visible parts of our lives are often supported by a quiet, unseen framework of inner strength, a reliable, interlocking grid of deep-seated resilience that effortlessly holds our shape together when the internal pressures begin to rise. When the internal pressures are finally no longer needed, and the basket has come to a gentle, scraping halt in a quiet, twilight meadow, the pilot must perform a meticulous, completely silent ritual to put the dormant machine safely to sleep. Throughout the long flight, the thick black rubber hoses connecting the fuel tanks to the overhead burner have been filled with highly pressurized liquid propane. Before the balloon can be safely packed away, these heavy lines must be completely emptied. The pilot firmly shuts off the main valves on the silver tanks, severing the fuel supply, and then gently opens the burner above. The small yellow pilot light, a tiny, constant flame that has burned continuously since the early morning, is left to slowly consume the remaining fuel trapped inside the hoses. The powerful roar is gone, replaced by a soft, sputtering, hissing whisper as the internal pressure slowly drops. The flame shrinks smaller and smaller, transitioning from bright yellow to a pale, fading blue, until finally, with one last microscopic sigh, it consumes the very last drop of energy and completely extinguishes itself. The lines are empty, safe, and cold. It is a beautiful, necessary process of safely bleeding off the residual pressure of the journey, gently starving the fires of the day until the mind and body can completely, safely power down into absolute motionless rest. With the fires extinguished and the massive expanse of nylon carefully folded back into its heavy canvas bag, the fleeting, weightless magic of the flight is quietly anchored to the earth through a small, heavy, deeply cherished tradition. Since the earliest days of modern recreational ballooning, pilots have carried small, meticulously crafted enamel pins deep in the pockets of their flying jackets. Each pin is a tiny, beautiful metallic replica of their specific balloon, perfectly matching the unique colours and intricate patterns of the envelope that just graced the sky. When the flight is completely over and the chase crew has successfully helped pack the equipment away, the pilot will quietly present one of these heavy, cold, shining pins to the passengers and the landowner whose field they borrowed. It is a profoundly tactile, permanent object, something smooth and solid that you can hold tightly between your thumb and forefinger, a permanent physical anchor for an experience that was inherently temporary, silent, and drifting. As you sink deeper into the heavy, comforting mattress, you can imagine holding one of these small, smooth, cooling memories in the palm of your hand, a quiet, tangible reminder of a beautiful journey perfectly completed, allowing you to finally close the door on the waking world and gently release your grip, drifting seamlessly into the welcoming velvet expanse of the deepest sleep. As you drift seamlessly into that welcoming velvet expanse of the deepest sleep, it is a beautiful, quiet thought to realize you're sharing the sky's threshold with the oldest, most delicate aeronauts on Earth. Millions of years before humanity ever dreamed of weaving massive sheets of nylon or capturing the deafening roar of a propane fire, tiny spiders were already mastering the quiet, elegant art of flight. In a remarkable, completely silent phenomenon known to biologists as arachnid ballooning, a young spider will patiently climb to the highest, most exposed tip of a blade of grass on a cool morning. There, It points its tiny abdomen toward the vast sky and releases a few impossibly fine strands of gossamer silk into the open air. These microscopic threads do not merely catch the physical moving wind, they actually possess the incredible ability to harness the invisible, vertical electrostatic currents naturally radiating from the Earth's surface. The tiny creature is lifted softly, effortlessly into the boundless atmosphere, carried away for miles on unseen electrical rivers. It is a profound, deeply comforting reminder that sometimes the most magnificent, expansive journeys begin not with an explosion of heavy, forceful energy, but with the quiet, simple release of a single, delicate thread, trusting the invisible currents of the vast world to catch you and carry you exactly where you need to be. Those invisible lifting currents and terrestrial winds eventually gather and merge high above the protective clouds, forming massive high-altitude rivers of freezing air that constantly, silently circle our spinning globe. When early, uncrewed meteorological balloons first ascended far enough into the deep, dark blue of the upper atmosphere to touch the edges of the jet stream, they revealed an astonishing, beautiful paradox of immense speed and absolute stillness. A balloon captured deep within the central core of the jet stream can be carried across entire sprawling continents at speeds exceeding 200 miles an hour. Yet, because the fragile floating instrument package is completely enveloped within the massive moving air mass, travelling at the exact same velocity as the roaring wind that surrounds it, it experiences absolutely no turbulence, no physical resistance, and no rushing sound whatsoever. To the balloon itself, suspended perfectly in the dead centre of that invisible high-altitude river, the environment feels entirely, breathlessly, perfectly still. The resting body grows heavier just imagining this perfect frictionless suspension, realising that even when we're moving through phases of incredible, rapid transition in our busy waking lives, we can still cultivate a deep, internal core of absolute motionless peace. In the quiet, deeply focused mid-century pursuit of mapping the distant stars, astronomers realised that this frictionless, high-altitude stillness offered a pristine, unclouded window into the universe, far superior to anything constructed on the solid ground. The Earth's lower atmosphere is a thick, chaotic ocean of shifting temperatures, moisture, and moving air, which is exactly what causes the distant stars to beautifully, but frustratingly, twinkle and blur to our terrestrial watching eyes. To finally see the cosmos clearly, without the distorting veil of the world, scientists in the late 1950s initiated Project Stratoscope, launching massive unmanned helium balloons carrying incredibly heavy, highly sensitive optical telescopes into the freezing thin air of the upper stratosphere. Floating over 80,000 feet above the heavy, hazy atmospheric soup, in a sky that appears more black than blue, these suspended, unblinking lenses were able to capture the very first, incredibly sharp, high-resolution images of the sun's boiling surface and the distant, swirling geometry of faraway galaxies. It is a powerful, perspective-widening truth. Sometimes, the only way to gain perfect, unclouded clarity on the vast, complex elements of our lives is to gently elevate ourselves far above the heavy, chaotic noise of our immediate surroundings, finding that quiet, elevated altitude where everything finally stops shifting and simply comes into sharp, beautiful focus. While those high-altitude, polished lenses silently peer out into the blinding light of the stars, modern research balloons are also frequently used to quietly, patiently listen to the deepest, most hidden murmurs of the Earth itself. Because a free-floating balloon is completely mechanically isolated from the harsh vibrations of the solid ground, and because it generates absolutely no wind noise as it drifts perfectly with the current, it is widely considered the single quietest listening platform ever devised by human engineering. Scientists suspend incredibly sensitive acoustic microphones, known as microbarometers, from the ground envelopes to record infrasound. Deep, low-frequency, heavily rolling sound waves that are completely inaudible to the fragile human ear. From their high, silent, floating sanctuary, these delicate microphones can clearly hear the slow, rhythmic, heavy crashing of ocean waves thousands of miles away, the deep groaning shifts of moving ancient glaciers, and the low, distant, waking rumble of heavily sleeping volcanoes. The mind can simply drift right now, beautifully mirroring this quiet, suspended receptivity, letting go of the constant need to speak or react, and finding profound comfort in just quietly, deeply listening to the slow, steady, reassuring rhythms of your own breathing filling the quiet room. Within the highly colourful, deeply familiar envelope of a traditional passenger balloon gently rising in the golden morning sun, there is a fascinating, invisible layering of elements that perfectly mirrors that quiet settling of the resting mind. We naturally assume that the massive, echoing cavern of trapped air is uniformly intensely hot from top to bottom, but it actually contains a beautiful, dramatic gradient of temperature. At the very highest point near the sealed, circular parachute valve at the crown, the gathered air is fiercely warm, often exceeding 200 degrees Fahrenheit, relentlessly pushing upward against the nylon to create the necessary buoyant lift. However, if you were to reach your hand upward from the woven wicker basket into the wide open mouth at the absolute bottom of the balloon, the air hovering just inside the dark fabric would feel wonderfully cool, nearly identical to the crisp ambient temperature of the damp morning field. The balloon comfortably holds these two extremes simultaneously, a pocket of intense, lifting warmth, safely layered high above a cool, open foundation. It feels very much like resting comfortably in a soft, familiar bed, where a thick, heavy blanket covers the shoulders and chest, capturing the body's warmth, while the ambient, cooling air of the dark room gently touches the face, creating a perfect, soothing balance of resting temperatures. This elegant, careful balancing of physical elements traces its philosophical origins back to the quiet, brilliant mind of Professor Jacques Charles, who successfully launched the world's very first crewed gas balloon over the slate rooftops and cobblestone streets of Paris in the winter of 1783. Unlike the roaring, fire-driven, smoke-filled creations of his famous contemporaries, the Montgolfier brothers, Charles utilised pure, invisible hydrogen, creating an aircraft of absolute, unbroken, majestic silence. But his most profound, enduring contribution to the history of the sky was his elegant invention of the quiet control systems that allowed human beings to gracefully negotiate their relationship with gravity. To descend from the high clouds, he created a delicate spring-loaded wooden valve at the top of the varnished silk envelope to softly, invisibly release the lifting gas. To ascend back toward the sun, he introduced the brilliantly simple concept of ballast, heavy canvas bags filled with fine, dry, golden sand. It was a beautiful, deeply poetic mechanism for navigating the vast world. You do not force your way higher by aggressively adding more fire or energy. You rise simply, quietly, by opening your hands and intentionally letting go of the heavy, unnecessary weight you've been carrying. You can feel that exact same gentle release right now, as the heavy muscles in your back and shoulders willingly surrender their remaining tension, sinking deeper and deeper into the supportive mattress with every slow, completely untroubled exhalation. That beautiful, liberating philosophy of letting go reached its most dramatic, awe-inspiring extreme just 2 years later, during the very first daring aerial crossing of the cold, grey, rolling expanse of the English Channel. As the pioneering balloonists Jean-Pierre Blanchard and Dr. John Jeffreys drifted slowly away from the iconic, chalk-white cliffs of Dover, the chilling, damp ocean air began to rapidly cool their lifting gas, causing their magnificent, highly decorated vessel to sink dangerously close to the churning, dark, freezing waves. In a desperate, quiet act of survival, they began tossing absolutely every physical possession out of the heavy woven basket. They dropped their heavy iron anchors, thick coiled lengths of hemp rope, their brass scientific instruments, their food, and finally, in the very last miles, even their heavy, ornate velvet coats, watching them all splash softly and disappear into the silent sea below. They successfully reach the dense, green, welcoming forests of the French coast, carrying absolutely nothing but themselves and the pure, unburdened fact of their own quiet survival. It is an incredible, historic testament to the fact that safe passage through the most daunting, expansive, unknown spaces often requires a willingness to completely shed the material things we mistakenly thought we needed, arriving on the distant, welcoming shore lighter, completely unencumbered and profoundly free. Today, instead of anxiously discarding our heavy coats into the sea to remain safely aloft, we can rely on incredibly small, highly protected sources of enduring energy to keep us flying. Hidden deep within the complex, gleaming metal architecture of the modern propane burner, just above the pilot's head, is a tiny, unsung, fiercely loyal hero of the journey, the pilot light. This is a remarkably small, heavily focused, intensely blue flame that the aeronaut quietly ignites with a spark before the vast balloon ever leaves the damp, shadowy morning grass. Throughout the entire, sweeping duration of the long flight, no matter how strong the freezing high-altitude winds become, or how long and quiet the main burner goes during a slow descent, this tiny, isolated flame never, ever goes out. It sits patiently in its specialized windproof stainless steel cup, a quiet, vigilant guardian waiting to instantly, reliably ignite the massive, roaring column of heat the very second the pilot squeezes the heavy brass blast valve. There is deep, abiding, emotional comfort in the simple presence of this tiny, perpetual flame. It beautifully reveals that we all possess a protected, quiet spark of inner resilience, a small, pilot light of the soul that patiently endures the cold and the wind, always remaining lit, always waiting, always ready to supply warmth and powerful energy the exact moment we finally call upon it. When that powerful, roaring energy eventually fills the massive canopy towering above, the colourful fabric expands not into a perfect, mathematically rigid, unyielding sphere, but into a very specific, graceful, slightly flattened profile, known gracefully in physics as the natural balloon shape. If you were to suspend a single, heavy, pristine droplet of water from the underside of a green leaf, the way invisible gravity and surface tension pull it into a softly swelling, bottom-heavy teardrop is the exact same geometry utilised by the greatest aeronautical engineers. This specific, highly organic shape is incredibly important because it ensures that the immense, outward stress of the heated, lifting gas is perfectly, equally distributed across every single woven nylon thread and thick vertical seam of the envelope. There are absolutely no sharp corners, no rigid, stress-bearing angles, and completely no single points of concentrated, dangerous tension. The massive structure survives and beautifully thrives simply by allowing the internal pressure to naturally dictate and define its final, organic, resting form. The breath naturally deepens within your chest, finding its own unforced organic rhythm, realizing that the most resilient, enduring shapes we can take in this life are those that softly, gracefully yield to the natural forces around us, rather than rigidly, exhaustingly fighting to maintain a perfect, unnatural state of rigid perfection. As the graceful, swelling fabric comfortably yields to the gentle wind high above, the heavy, intricately woven rattan basket swinging quietly below requires its own unique, deeply gentle care to maintain its incredible, flexible strength. You might naturally assume that a sturdy vessel designed to carry humans safely through the dry, high-altitude air should be kept meticulously dry and shielded from the elements, but seasoned, dedicated balloonists know a beautiful, deeply counterintuitive secret. To ensure the thick, woody vines of the wicker do not become terribly brittle, dry, cracked, and fragile over long years of demanding use, maintenance crews will periodically wash the entire heavy basket with copious amounts of fresh, clean, cool water. They allow the dry, thirsty, ancient rattan to deeply soak in the standing moisture, physically swelling the natural plant fibres and fully restoring their inherent, wonderful, bouncing elasticity. This simple, quiet act of deep hydration ensures that when the basket finally meets the solid, uneven earth at the end of a very long journey, it can softly bend, creak, and physically flex, absorbing the heavy, sudden impact with organic, practiced grace rather than dangerously snapping under the harsh pressure. It is a deeply soothing, tactile, and grounding reminder that remaining supple, flexible, and fully ready to absorb the unexpected, heavy impacts of the world requires us to regularly, quietly immerse ourselves in the simple, restorative elements that deeply nourish our oldest, most foundational fibres. As those oldest, foundational fibres of the wicker absorb the cool, grounding water, the pilot turns their attention back to the invisible, shifting rivers of the morning sky, seeking to intimately understand the wind before ever leaving the earth. To accomplish this, they do not rely on loud, complex machinery, spinning radar dishes or flashing digital screens. Instead, they reach into their heavy jacket pocket and pull out a small, brilliantly simple tool of absolute childlike wonder, a tiny bottle of liquid soap and a fragile plastic wand. Standing in the quiet, damp grass, they blow a gentle stream of iridescent, shimmering bubbles into the cool dawn air. These delicate, weightless spheres, tiny, fragile balloons themselves, instantly catch the absolute lightest, most imperceptible microcurrents of the breeze. The pilot watches them intently as they drift, noting exactly how they softly rise, where they gently swirl, and at what precise altitude they suddenly, silently change direction. It is a breathtaking, beautiful contrast of scale and intention. The safe, majestic trajectory of a towering 3-ton flying vessel is first quietly mapped out by the dancing, temporary flight of a fragile rainbow-coloured bubble. Your mind can drift just as lightly now, following the path of least resistance, knowing that sometimes the smallest, most delicate thoughts can show us exactly which way the peaceful winds are blowing. When those peaceful winds finally carry the majestic craft upward on a crisp, deeply frosted autumn morning, the passengers often encounter a beautiful, invisible phenomenon that completely defies our standard understanding of the physical world. We naturally expect that the higher we climb away from the solid, sun-warmed earth, the colder the surrounding air will inevitably become. Yet, during the quietest, most pristine hours of the dawn, the atmosphere frequently creates a comforting hidden layer, known beautifully as a temperature inversion. Because the ground loses its gathered heat so rapidly under a clear, starry night sky, the air immediately resting on the freezing grass becomes bitterly cold and heavy. But as the balloon softly ascends just a few hundred feet above the white frost, it suddenly, miraculously breaks through this chilling atmospheric boundary and enters a trapped, silent pool of profoundly warm air. The sudden, unexpected wash of warmth against the face feels exactly like stepping out of a dark, cold shadow directly into a brilliant sunlit room. It is a stunning atmospheric embrace, a secret layer of pure comfort hiding just above the surface of the world. It reminds us that even when the ground beneath us feels harsh and unforgivingly cold, there is often a warm, gentle layer of profound comfort waiting for us, if we simply allow ourselves to rise just a little bit higher. Finding that warm, hidden layer is especially magical when the earth below is completely blanketed in the thick, heavy silence of a deep winter snowfall. While ballooning is often associated with the bright, lush greens of lively summer festivals, the absolute most serene, acoustically pure flights occur in the dead, quiet centre of winter. When a thick layer of fresh, undisturbed snow covers the wide valleys and the sleeping dark forests, it acts as a massive, natural acoustic sponge. the millions of microscopic air pockets trapped within the crystalline snowflakes perfectly absorb and dampen the ambient noise of the waking world. Drifting over this pristine, monochromatic landscape of brilliant white and deep charcoal shadows, the silence of the flight becomes absolute, heavy, and deeply profound. Without the rustling of green leaves or the distant muffled hum of busy roads, the only sound is the occasional slow creak of the wicker basket and the rhythmic deep breathing of your own chest. The sharp, cold air outside the basket perfectly contrasts with the internal, radiant warmth of the burner, creating a deeply satisfying, cozy equilibrium, much like watching a silent blizzard through a thick frosted window pane while wrapped tightly in a heavy woolen blanket. The body naturally grows heavier in this perfect, insulated quiet, the muscles softening and releasing their tension, completely supported by the knowledge that the world has temporarily turned down its volume, offering you a vast, beautifully muted space to finally rest. To safely contain that radiant, cozy heat while battling the sharp, freezing extremes of the winter sky, the magnificent envelope must be designed with an invisible structural hierarchy of endurance. If you look closely at the massive, swelling teardrop from afar, the fabric may appear uniform and consistent, but the absolute top third of the balloon, the grand, sweeping dome that captures the most intense, punishing heat from the roaring fire, is often constructed from an entirely different, vastly superior material. This specialised heavy-duty cloth is known in the aeronautical world as hyperlast. While the lower, colourful panels are made of standard, lightweight ripstop nylon, the hyperlast crown is woven with a much denser, thicker thread and heavily coated with a specialised invisible silicone barrier on both sides. This makes the top of the balloon incredibly resilient, perfectly capable of withstanding the relentless boiling temperatures and the harsh, degrading ultraviolet light of the high altitudes without ever losing its structural integrity. It is a beautiful, deeply comforting example of intelligent protective design. We do not need to be impenetrable everywhere all at once, but we must consciously reinforce our highest, most vulnerable spaces, ensuring the very top of our internal architecture remains strong enough to safely hold the immense, beautiful energy we generate. That brilliant protective architecture of the modern era stands in stark, wonderful contrast to the incredibly daring, romantic vulnerability of the Victorian aeronauts. In the late 19th century, ascending into the unknown sky was not seen merely as a mechanical or scientific endeavour, but as an act of supreme, elevated elegance. When aristocratic explorers and brave early aviators stepped into their varnished, creaking wicker baskets, they absolutely did not wear heavy protective flight suits or utilitarian weatherproof gear. They dressed in their absolute finest, most elaborate formal wear, out of a deep, abiding respect for the majestic, pristine nature of the sky. Gentlemen flew in perfectly tailored wool tailcoats, crisp white cravats, and tall silk top hats, while daring women aeronauts ascended in sweeping, voluminous silk dresses, heavy velvet cloaks, and delicately plumed bonnets. They fundamentally believed that to visit the heavens one must dress for a grand, divine occasion. Floating miles above the earth, completely exposed to the freezing winds, they would casually, quietly sip warm tea from fragile, painted porcelain cups. It is a stunning, romantic image of carrying our deepest sense of grace and beauty into the most untamed, unpredictable spaces, beautifully reminding us that true elegance is not about the harsh environment we find ourselves in, but the quiet, dignified way we choose to carry ourselves through it. While they delicately balanced porcelain cups in the freezing air, those early, elegant explorers relied on the simplest, most fundamental elements of the Earth to understand their exact place in the sky. Long before the invention of complex digital altimeters, flashing screens and satellite tracking, aeronauts measured their breathtaking altitude using simple, heavy glass tubes filled with shining liquid mercury. This beautiful, ancient instrument, the barometer, operated on a profound, deeply reliable principle of invisible weight. The Earth's atmosphere is a massive, heavy ocean of air, and it is heaviest at the very bottom, pressing down with immense unseen force. As the balloon drifted silently upward, gradually leaving the heavy pressures of the ground behind, the invisible weight of the air pushing on the small pool of mercury would steadily, predictably decrease. The silver liquid inside the glass tube would slowly, gracefully drop, providing a perfect, silent, visual representation of their ascent into the lighter, thinner air. There is something deeply grounding about realizing that our height, our magnificent elevation, can be measured simply by observing how much heavy, invisible pressure we have successfully left behind. You can allow your own breath to settle deeply now, feeling the heavy accumulated pressures of the long day slowly dropping away, leaving you feeling lighter, unburdened, and perfectly safe in this elevated, quiet space. When that quiet, elevated space moves slowly over one of the most ancient, undisturbed landscapes on the planet, the balloon becomes a silent witness to the magnificent rhythmic heartbeat of the wild. In the vast, sweeping plains of the Serengeti in East Africa, hot air balloons launch, just as the deep indigo night begins to crack with the fiery golden light of the equatorial dawn. Drifting low over the sprawling, dew-soaked acacia trees and the endless oceans of tall, blonde grass, the massive balloon casts a large, dark, gliding shadow. Yet, because the aircraft completely lacks the terrifying mechanical chop of helicopter blades or the loud, roaring engines of an airplane, the grand herds of animals below are beautifully, entirely undisturbed. The aeronauts can gaze down in absolute suspended silence at thousands of migrating wildebeest moving like a slow, dark river across the earth, or watch a towering family of giraffes casting incredibly long, spindly morning shadows as they peacefully strip leaves from the high branches. The balloon seamlessly integrates into the wild, floating safely above the ancient rhythmic cycles of life and death without ever interrupting them. It is a profoundly moving, perspective-widening experience, showing us that we can gently move through the world as a quiet, observant witness, deeply connected to the sweeping beauty below without ever needing to control, disrupt, or change it. Moving silently over those vast ancient plains eventually gives way to the profound realization that the Earth itself is not merely a static canvas waiting to be observed, but a massive rotating sphere continuously engaged in its own constant silent journey. For the few incredibly daring pilots who undertake extreme long-duration flights lasting many days and nights, navigating the high-altitude winds involves a complex mind-bending phenomenon known as the Coriolis effect. Because the heavy, solid Earth is constantly spinning on its invisible axis, the thick atmosphere wrapping around it does not move in simple, straight lines. When a balloon is suspended in the incredibly high, thin air of the stratosphere for a long period, completely disconnected from the ground, the Earth literally rotates beneath it. A pilot might point their compass directly north and drift steadily forward, but because the ground below is constantly twisting eastward, their actual physical track across the map will slowly, beautifully curve in a massive sweeping arc. To fly for days at a time is to physically experience the immense, turning mechanics of the solar system. The mind can simply drift into this vast cosmic rotation, finding deep, heavy comfort in the knowledge that even when we feel completely still, suspended in our own quiet rest, the universe is constantly, gently turning, carrying us safely forward through the dark, starry expanse of time. The specific vessels designed to endure those vast cosmic rotations and safely cross entire, endless oceans are marvels of scale that completely challenge the human imagination. While a standard recreational balloon is certainly large, holding roughly enough warm air to fill a moderately sized, comfortable house, the balloons engineered for global circumnavigation are floating, structural leviathans. When the legendary Virgin Pacific Flyer was inflated for its historic transoceanic journey, its envelope was not the size of a house. It was the size of a towering 20-story skyscraper, It held over 2.5 million cubic feet of gently heated air. If you were to stand inside the cold, uninflated envelope laid out on the ground, it would feel exactly like standing in the echoing, cavernous nave of the world's largest, most magnificent cathedral. Yet, despite this overwhelming, almost terrifying immensity, the fundamental physics of the flight remained beautifully, exactly the same as the smallest, fragile paper lantern. It still relied entirely on a simple breath of warmth and the delicate, woven strength of its fabric skin. It is a deeply soothing, elegant truth. The fundamental, quiet rules of balance and warmth do not change, no matter how impossibly large or daunting the endeavour becomes. You do not need an entirely new set of rules to handle the vastness of your life. You only need to trust the simple, grounding principles of warmth, steady breath, and quiet balance. When those immense, awe-inspiring journeys are finally concluded, and the grand, soaring architecture of the sky is brought back down to the quiet, humble earth, the balloon must enter a long, necessary period of deep, restorative hibernation. Once every single drop of air has been meticulously, slowly pressed out of the vibrant nylon, the massive fabric is tightly rolled and packed into a remarkably small, heavy canvas envelope bag, often no larger than a standard, sturdy travelling trunk. This heavy, dense package, along with the beautiful woven wicker basket and the polished, gleaming metal burners, is then transported to a cool, dry, dark sanctuary to properly rest. The magnificent aircraft that recently commanded the vast open heavens and brushed against the freezing edges of the stratosphere is now safely tucked away in the quiet corner of a warm barn or a dedicated silent garage. It will sleep there for days or even long quiet winter months, completely undisturbed, its vibrant colours hidden in the gentle dark, its immense potential energy resting quietly in the tightly woven threads. It is the perfect, ultimate exhalation of the journey. As you settle deeper and deeper into your own quiet sanctuary, wrapped securely in the soft, heavy warmth of your blankets, you can beautifully mirror this profound, enclosing rest, allowing all your vast, expansive daytime energy to fold safely inward, trusting that you are perfectly stored, perfectly safe, and deeply resting until it is exactly the right time to rise again. Even while the great vessel sleeps securely in its heavy canvas bag, trusting that it is perfectly stored until the exact right time to rise again, its vibrant history remains vividly awake within the pages of a small, meticulous book. By strict aviation tradition and careful law, every hot air balloon carries a dedicated, bound logbook. This small diary of the sky does not record emotional memories or poetic observations, but rather the quiet, undeniable mathematics of its existence. The pilot meticulously records the exact date, the precise number of minutes spent entirely aloft, the subtle shifting of the ambient temperatures, and the specific quiet fields where the heavy basket finally returned to the earth. Over many years, these crisp, lined pages become a beautiful, comprehensive map of the balloon's entire life, a physical memory of every single breeze it ever caught and every cloud it ever brushed against. The mind can find deep, resonant comfort in this orderly preservation. You do not need to actively hold on to the chaotic, fleeting details of your own long day. You can simply let them go, trusting that the important, beautiful moments are already quietly recorded and safely filed away in the deep, resting spaces of your memory. The numbers recorded in those small, quiet pages represent an architecture of truly impossible or inspiring scale. It is difficult to comprehend the sheer size of the sleeping giant when it's tightly rolled into a cube sitting in a dark garage. However, if you were to take the resting nylon envelope out of its heavy storage bag and fully, patiently unroll it across a flat open pasture, the vibrant fabric would easily cover more than a quarter of an American football field. The surface area of a standard passenger balloon is vast, comprising thousands of square yards of meticulously stitched material weighing several hundred pounds. The act of packing it away requires the dedicated, synchronized effort of an entire crew, rolling and folding the massive acreage of colour into a remarkably small, dense geometric package. It is a stunning, physical demonstration of how something unbelievably expansive, something capable of wrapping itself around thousands of cubic feet of air and commanding the entire morning sky, can gracefully fold itself down into a small, quiet, unassuming shape when it is finally time to rest. When that vast acreage of fabric eventually pulls the woven carriage back to the damp earth, the landing is softened by an ancient terrestrial technology completely hidden beneath the rattan floor. If you were to look underneath the heavy wicker basket, you would not find wheels, metal landing gear, or complex hydraulic shocks. Instead, the bottom is fitted with thick, solid, parallel runners, typically carved by hand from dense, unyielding oak or incredibly resilient, flexible ashwood. These long, polished wooden skids serve a beautifully simple, elegant purpose. As the balloon makes its final sweeping approach and the basket touches the open field, these hardwood runners allow the entire craft to glide smoothly over the wet morning grass exactly like a heavy wooden sled skimming over fresh snow. They absorb the initial friction of the earth, turning what could be a jarring sudden halt into a long, incredibly smooth, sliding deceleration. The physical body can naturally soften into the mattress now, beautifully mirroring this smooth, frictionless glide, feeling the heavy momentum of the waking hours gently sliding to a perfect, completely supported stop. This gentle, sliding touch against the earth is frequently mirrored high in the majestic sky during a remarkably tender, quiet interaction between multiple balloons. In the crowded, intensely colourful airspace of a massive morning festival, with hundreds of envelopes sharing the exact same invisible wind, it is not uncommon for two massive balloons to drift incredibly close and actually, physically bump into one another. In the precise language of aviation, this gentle mid-air collision is affectionately known as a kiss. Because both massive vessels are suspended perfectly within the exact same moving air mass, they are travelling at the exact same speed and in the exact same direction. Consequently, the relative speed between them is absolutely zero. When they touch, there is no violent crash, no dangerous friction, and absolutely no sound, save for the soft, whispering crinkle of nylon pressing briefly against nylon. They simply share a soft, rebounding embrace before the subtle, microscopic differences in their altitudes cause them to drift peacefully apart again. It is a deeply calming, beautiful realization. Even when our paths completely intersect with others in the vast open sky, the interaction can be entirely soft, completely safe, and wonderfully gentle. The soft, rebounding touch of the fabric often occurs in a unique, highly elevated light that those resting quietly on the ground cannot yet perceive. In deep, winding, mountainous regions, dedicated balloonists will purposefully inflate their craft in the freezing, pitch-black darkness of the pre-dawn, launching into the night specifically to intercept a fleeting, magical optical phenomenon known as alpenglow. As the balloon rises high above the sleeping, shadowed valleys, it reaches the upper altitudes just as the very first invisible rays of the sun begin to bend over the curvature of the Earth. Long before the sun actually crests the horizon, its light is filtered through the thick atmosphere, stripping away the harsh blue tones and bathing the high peaks and the floating balloon in an intense glowing wash of deep violet, soft pink and brilliant burning apricot. For a few breathtaking minutes the aeronauts are floating in a warm painted sky, completely illuminated by the dawn, while the entire world directly beneath them remains securely tucked into the cool, dark velvet of the night. It is a profound, quiet privilege to witness the light before the rest of the world wakes, a beautiful reminder that there is always brightness approaching, even when our immediate surroundings still feel completely dark. To know exactly when they will successfully intersect with that high pink light, the pilot continuously consults an instrument that silently, rhythmically breathes right alongside them. Moving far away from the heavy, fragile liquid mercury barometers of the Victorian era, the modern balloon altimeter relies on a tiny, brilliant mechanical invention called an aneroid capsule. Hidden deep behind the numbered glass dial of the gauge is a small, flexible, perfectly sealed box made of thin, corrugated beryllium copper. Inside this tiny metal box is a pure, absolute vacuum. As the balloon slowly ascends into the sky and the heavy atmospheric pressure of the surrounding air begins to steadily drop, the vacuum inside the capsule naturally expands, pushing the corrugated metal walls outward. This microscopic expanding movement is beautifully translated through a series of incredibly delicate watch-like gears to move the needle on the dial. The instrument acts exactly like a tiny, sensitive mechanical lung, constantly expanding and contracting in perfect, silent harmony with the shifting pressures of the atmosphere. Your own breath can effortlessly synchronize with this quiet, mechanical rhythm, expanding fully and softly, perfectly measuring the depth of your own deep, internal relaxation. As the sun finally crests the sharp mountain ridge and the tiny metal lung of the altimeter stabilizes at cruising height, the balloon begins to cast its long, stretching morning shadow across the waking landscape. This massive, gliding silhouette does far more than simply darken the dew-soaked grass. It actually creates a microscopic temporary change in the local terrestrial weather. Because the dark, perfectly round shadow completely blocks the sun's radiant, warming heat from reaching the soil, the ground directly beneath the floating balloon cools by just a fraction of a degree. This sudden, tiny drop in temperature creates a localized, invisible pocket of cooler, denser air that gently sinks, forming a microscopic downdraft. As the balloon moves silently over the Earth, it literally changes the precise behavior of the air it moves through, acting as a small, solitary, artificial cloud, casting its own quiet, cooling weather across the fields. The mind can simply drift right now, completely enjoying the cool, quiet shade of its own deep rest, trusting that it is perfectly natural to create a peaceful, shadowed space for oneself, altering the temperature of the day to find absolute comfort. Following that cool, moving shadow from the solid ground, the dedicated chase crew must sometimes communicate with the drifting pilot, without relying on the modern, jarring intrusion of loud radio static or ringing phones. When traversing deep, silent canyons or remote, off-grid farmland, they often utilize an ancient, completely silent language of color and geometry. Stored safely in the back of the chase vehicle are several large, brilliantly colored canvas tarps, usually dyed in high contrast shades of neon orange or deep, unnatural yellow. By unfolding these heavy tarps and laying them flat on the green grass in specific, recognized patterns, the crew can send vital, silent messages up to the sky. A giant coloured X might gently warn the pilot that the winds on the ground are shifting dangerously, while a wide, pointing V serves as a silent, welcoming arrow, beautifully indicating the safest, softest pasture for a final landing. It feels exactly like reading massive ancient symbols left by a careful, watching guardian. You do not need to hear a loud voice to know you are being guided. Your mind has its own quiet, internal symbols, gently and silently pointing the way toward the deepest, most restorative sleep. This deep, unspoken trust in the silent guidance of the crew below is matched entirely by the profound, mechanical trust built directly into the overhead burner. If you look closely at the gleaming, polished stainless steel framework suspended securely above the pilot's head, you will almost never see just a single, isolated coil of fire. Instead, there are two completely independent, perfectly mirrored burner systems side by side. This is the beautiful, reassuring aeronautical principle of total redundancy. Each separate burner is connected to its own dedicated fuel lines and draws from entirely different heavy liquid propane tanks, resting in the corners of the basket. If one system develops a slight freeze, or simply needs to briefly rest during a long, demanding flight, the pilot simply shifts their hand a few inches to the right and effortlessly squeezes the other valve. The second system is instantly, flawlessly ready to provide the exact same roaring, powerful warmth, completely unaffected by the temporary silence of its twin. You do not ever need to hold tightly to a single rigid plan. Your mind naturally possesses its own quiet, redundant backups, an endless well of deep, alternative peace, allowing your breathing to settle into a completely supported, completely safe rhythm. The enduring human desire for that ultimate redundant safety and the thrill of the high sky eventually led to the creation of some of the most magnificent stationary flying machines in the history of the world. In the late 19th century, the romantic city of Paris absolutely marvelled at Henri Giffard's giant tethered balloon, a colossal, perfectly round sphere temporarily installed in the manicured courtyard of the Tuileries Garden. This staggering marvel of engineering did not drift freely over the countryside. Instead, it carried up to 50 elegantly dressed passengers at a time, straight up into the clouds, while remaining securely attached to the earth by a massive, heavy, unyielding steel cable. A giant, quietly churning steam winch resting on the grass below would slowly, safely reel the massive envelope back down to the ground, after the passengers had enjoyed their breathtaking bird's-eye view of the winding River Seine. It provided the absolute heart-soaring thrill of total elevation, combined with the deep, unbreakable security of a solid, physical tether to the familiar earth. It is an incredibly comforting sensation to imagine resting in that heavy, elevated carriage, completely surrounded by the quiet, open sky, yet knowing with absolute certainty that there is a massive, unbreakable thread holding you perfectly safe. And as we look even closer at the remarkable woven materials that make up these unbreakable threads and the baskets they support, we discover an entirely new layer of quiet, enduring strength, rooted deep within the shadowed floors of ancient forests. The rattan used to craft the traditional balloon basket is not harvested from a sturdy solitary tree, standing alone in a bright meadow. It is in fact a magnificent climbing palm that originates in the dense, humid, deeply shadowed rainforests of Southeast Asia. In its natural wild state, rattan grows as an incredibly long, flexible vine, patiently winding its way up the massive trunks of older trees, reaching hundreds of feet upward through the thick, dark canopy just to find a single warm patch of sunlight. By weaving this specific plant into the carriage of a flying machine, aeronauts are utilizing a material that inherently possesses a botanical memory of ascending. The very fibers of the basket are intimately familiar with the slow, persistent journey of leaving the heavy, shaded ground to seek the bright, open sky. It is a profound poetic synergy between the vessel and its purpose, proving that the desire to rise is woven into the very fabric of the journey before the fire is ever lit. Beneath the complex interlocking patterns of that reaching rattan, resting directly beneath the thick leather boots of the pilot and the soft shoes of the quiet passengers, lies a hidden foundation of absolute unwavering stability. The actual floor of the wicker basket is not woven at all, but is typically constructed from a single, thick, heavy sheet of marine-grade plywood, renowned for its incredible resistance to moisture and immense structural strength. Yet this solid wooden floor is not seamlessly sealed to the woven walls. A deliberate narrow gap is purposefully left all the way around the outer edge, creating a permeable boundary between the heavy wood and the flexible cane. This quiet, intentional space allows the basket to constantly, softly breathe. If the balloon completes its long journey by touching down in a dew-drenched meadow or skimming the surface of a quiet lake, any water that enters the carriage simply, effortlessly drains away through these hidden borders. It is a masterful, grounding lesson in structural harmony. We can build a strong, unyielding foundation for ourselves, while still leaving the soft, flexible edges of our lives open enough to let the unexpected passing elements beautifully flow through us, without ever weighing us down. your own body can find its own solid, unyielding foundation right now, sinking heavily and deeply into the mattress, allowing the bed to completely hold your weight while your breath flows softly, easily in and out of the quiet edges of your awareness. Because the balloon surrenders so completely to the invisible currents of the air, moving in absolute flawless harmony with the surrounding wind, it creates a visual phenomenon of profound, almost surreal stillness. If a pilot were to tie a brightly coloured heavy silk flag to the outer edge of the wicker basket, a casual observer on the ground might naturally expect it to snap and flutter wildly in the high-altitude breeze. However, once the balloon is untethered and fully aloft, the flag will absolutely never flap. Because the entire massive aircraft is travelling at the exact same velocity as the air mass that holds it, there is no rushing wind to catch the fabric. The colourful silk flag will simply hang perfectly limp, draped silently downward by the gentle, invisible pull of gravity alone. In the precise technical language of navigation, the balloon has absolutely no steerage way. It does not fight the medium it travels through. It becomes entirely one with it. This completely limp resting flag is the ultimate quiet visual proof of absolute surrender. A beautiful reminder that when we finally stop resisting the natural currents of our lives and move gracefully with them, the exhausting, noisy friction completely disappears, leaving only a state of perfect, suspended calm. To understand the nature of those natural currents when there is absolutely no friction to feel against the skin, pilots have developed beautifully gentle, deeply observant methods of asking the sky for directions. While floating over a complex winding valley, the air 50 feet below the basket might be moving in a completely different direction than the air perfectly holding the balloon. To safely scout these invisible lower layers without changing altitude, the aeronaut acts as a quiet sower of seeds. They might reach into a small pouch and release a pinch of dried milkweed seeds, or drop a weightless white dollop of ordinary shaving cream over the edge of the woven rail. As this tiny, incredibly light marker falls slowly toward the earth, the pilot watches it with unbroken, quiet focus. The small white speck will suddenly curve, beautifully tracing the hidden, twisting microcurrents of the lower atmosphere, acting as a gentle, expendable scout exploring the unseen path ahead. It is a deeply peaceful, unhurried way of gathering knowledge. Rather than forcefully plunging into the unknown, we can simply release a small, quiet thought or a tiny, weightless intention, watching patiently to see exactly where the natural flow of the world carries it. This profound, patient understanding of the atmosphere's invisible architecture allows for feats of astonishing pinpoint precision that completely defy the massive, bulky nature of the aircraft. During the quiet, golden mornings of major ballooning festivals, highly skilled pilots engage in a delicate aerial ballet known as a key grab. A tall, slender wooden pole is erected in the very centre of a massive grassy field, with a tiny gleaming brass ring resting lightly on its very top. The pilots launch from miles away, completely out of sight, relying solely on their intimate, quiet knowledge of the layered winds. By adding just a whisper of heat to rise, or allowing the balloon to cool by a fraction of a degree to sink, they catch intersecting invisible rivers of air that steer the 3-ton vessel toward the target. In a breathtaking display of silent mastery, the massive balloon drifts over the field, hovering just inches above the grass, and a passenger simply leans over the padded suede bolster to gently pluck the brass ring from the pole. There is absolutely no steering wheel, no mechanical rudder, and no forced propulsion, only an absolute, masterful harmony with the elements. You do not need to steer your own thoughts right now. There is no rigid wheel to grip, no forced direction you must take. You can simply allow the quiet, natural currents of the evening to carry you, trusting that you are already drifting exactly where you need to be, moving softly toward a place of deep, profound rest. This deep reliance on the invisible gifts of the atmosphere echoes back to a time when the sky was intimately connected to the glowing, gaslit streets of the 19th century. Before helium became widely available and easily transported in heavy steel cylinders, the grand painted balloons of the Victorian era utilised a completely different, wonderfully integrated source of lift. To fill their massive varnished silk envelopes, daring aeronauts did not rely on open, roaring fires or exotic, specialised gases. They simply tapped directly into the municipal heartbeat of the city itself. They inflated their majestic aircraft using common coal gas, the exact same invisible, highly buoyant vapour that fueled the flickering golden street lamps lining the cobblestone avenues of London and Paris. A long, heavy canvas hose would be attached directly to the city's underground lighting grid, slowly transferring the illuminating breath of the metropolis into the waiting balloon. It is a stunning, deeply romantic thought. The very same energy that pushed back the dark shadows of the city streets at midnight was ultimately used to carry human beings high into the brilliant, unobstructed sunlight of the clouds. Inside the modern, brightly coloured descendant of those Victorian spheres, the process of safely capturing the lifting air relies on an incredibly simple, delightfully domestic piece of technology. At the absolute highest point of the balloon's interior, the large circular parachute valve must remain perfectly, tightly centred and closed, while the massive envelope lies flat and vulnerable on the damp morning grass, slowly filling with the blast of a cold air fan. To keep this vital, heavy piece of fabric from shifting out of place before the hot air provides its natural upward sealing pressure, engineers rely on small, precise squares of Velcro. These simple, familiar, interlocking hooks and loops, identical to the ones holding together a heavy winter coat, quietly secure the top of the world. As the pilot finally ignites the roaring burner and the intensely hot air rapidly expands inside the nylon cavern, the immense rising pressure naturally silently tears the Velcro tabs apart, allowing the parachute valve to seat perfectly against the opening. It is a beautiful, invisible transition of power where a temporary, humble terrestrial fastener holds everything safely together just long enough for the true, powerful, uplifting energy of the journey to finally take over. That powerful, uplifting energy is generated by the complex spiralling stainless steel coils of the burner, which require their own quiet, meticulous care to function with perfect, silent efficiency. After a long, beautiful flight through the cool morning air, the intense combustion of the liquid propellant always leaves behind a delicate, matte black dusting of carbon soot, clinging tightly to the gleaming metal tubes. Upon returning to the quiet sanctuary of the storage barn, the pilot will carefully, patiently wipe this dark residue away with a soft, clean cloth. This repetitive, grounding chore is not performed merely for the sake of shining aesthetic beauty. Carbon soot is, in fact, an incredibly powerful, microscopic thermal insulator. If left to accumulate, this thin, dark layer would silently prevent the intense heat of the flame from efficiently penetrating the metal coils to vaporize the freezing liquid fuel inside. By wiping the coils perfectly clean, the pilot ensures that the transfer of warmth remains pure, immediate, and utterly unobstructed. As you rest here in the quiet dark, your own slow, steady breathing acts as that soft, clean cloth, gently wiping away the accumulated, insulating soot of the busy day. Every exhalation clears the invisible residue of stress and noise, allowing the deep, comforting warmth of rest to penetrate your mind with pure, unobstructed efficiency. When that pure, unobstructed flight takes place in an atmosphere that is incredibly cold, crisp, and profoundly dry, the massive, moving architecture of the balloon can interact with the sky in a way that produces its own silent, ghostly light. As the sprawling thousands of square yards of woven nylon fabric rub continuously against the dry, rushing air molecules during a rapid ascent, the entire envelope can act like a massive floating capacitor, slowly accumulating an immense invisible charge of static electricity. If the balloon is flying during the pitch-black silent hours of a deep night, or waiting quietly on the frost-covered ground just before the dawn, this gathered electrical tension sometimes beautifully, harmlessly releases itself. It manifests as a breathtaking phenomenon known as St. Elmo's fire. Tiny, branching, delicate rivers of faint, shimmering blue light that dance and crawl silently across the curved, dark fabric of the envelope. It is a stunning, completely silent echo of the sky's own hidden energy, safely contained on the skin of the balloon. It serves as a gentle, hypnotic reminder that even in the absolute deepest, quietest dark, there is always a subtle, hidden energy resting just beneath the surface, capable of generating moments of profound, unexpected beauty. When the beautiful journey is completely over and the nylon envelope is finally folded away into its heavy, dark canvas bag, it faces one final, incredibly small, terrestrial challenge in the quiet corners of the storage barn. The deep, dark folds of the soft, expensive fabric present an absolute, irresistible paradise for tiny field mice seeking a warm, insulated sanctuary from the encroaching winter cold. To protect the sleeping giant from these tiny, industrious visitors, pilots do not rely on harsh chemicals or loud deterrents. Instead, they tuck small, fragrant bundles of dried mint leaves or smooth, aromatic blocks of raw cedar wood deep into the very centre of the rolled canvas. As the balloon rests undisturbed for the long, quiet months of the off-season, the fabric slowly, deeply absorbs these calming, earthy, natural scents. When the heavy bag is finally opened again in the bright light of the next spring, the unfolding nylon releases a soft, beautiful cloud of crushed mint and warm cedar into the fresh morning air. The balloon sleeps wrapped entirely in the soothing, fragrant aroma of the deep forest floor, proving that the most magnificent artifacts of the sky are ultimately protected, preserved, and beautifully scented by the quietest, most humble offerings of the earth. The unfolding nylon releases that soft, fragrant cloud of crushed mint and warm cedar, a scent that marks the quiet boundary between the earth and the heavens. It is here, in this fragrant stillness, that we encounter the final, most profound secret of the sky, a phenomenon known as the balloonist's blessing. This tradition is rooted in the very first successful human flight, a moment when the world changed forever. It is said that when those early pioneers looked down from their silken gallery, they realized that the wind does not just move us, it welcomes us. There is a specific, rarely seen state of the atmosphere where the air is so perfectly balanced, so utterly tranquil, that a balloon can hover motionless for an hour, suspended in a pocket of absolute equilibrium. In this state, the pilot can turn off the burner entirely, letting the metal coils grow cold and silent, yet the balloon remains exactly where it is. It is a state of perfect buoyancy, where the weight of the traveller and the spirit of the sky are in total, flawless agreement. This 101st wonder is the realization that peace is not always a destination we must travel toward with effort. Sometimes, peace is a place that already exists within the air, waiting for us to become still enough to find it. It reveals that the most magnificent thing we can do is to simply stop striving, to let the fire go out, and to trust that we are exactly where we are meant to be. The sky does not require us to do anything more than exist within its embrace. The journey through these 101 wonders is now complete. The vast, colourful tapestry of the air has been woven and folded, and the heavy wicker basket has found its final, resting place in the tall, soft grass. You have travelled over ancient stone chimneys, skimmed the surface of mirror-still lakes, and drifted through the silver light of the high stratosphere. And now, as the echoes of the burner fade into the deep, velvet quiet of the room, you are permitted to let it all go. You do not need to remember the weight of the rattan or the strength of the hyperless crown. You do not need to hold on to the names of the winds or the history of the silk. Like the air cooling inside the envelope, the thoughts of the day are growing heavier, settling down, finding the earth. The journey has done its work. The mind is now a vast open space, as calm and clear as a dawn sky before the first launch. Your body is the anchor now, a deep and steady weight that is perfectly supported, perfectly safe. The mattress is the cool green field, holding you with a strength that requires nothing from you in return. Every breath you take is a slow, rhythmic exhalation of the days-long flight. With every breath, the horizon of the waking world grows more distant, more blurred, until it is nothing more than a soft, dark line at the edge of your awareness. There is no more navigating to be done. There are no more currents to seek. You have found the ultimate trim, that point of perfect balance where everything is still. The fabric of the day is folded, the burners are cold, the silence is absolute and kind. You are free to drift into the deep, trackless ocean of sleep, where the only movement is the soft, rising tide of your own rest. The stars are out now, and the world is asleep beneath you. You are held, you are home, and now 101 wonders are resting with you. Sleep now. Good night.